right, Bismillah, we're gonna start because we want to keep on time. So let me just introduce before the video comes up. Let me introduce Shoaib Malik, who's going to lecture to you on the processes scientifically of evolution. Shoaib Malik has a double doctorate. There's a doctorate in chemical engineering and a doctorate in theology. He's written a book. He's written more than just one book, but he's written a book called Islam and Evolution, related to the Ghazalian paradigm, which has been widely engaged with across the globe and has spurred a discourse around the relationship between Islam and evolution, obviously, as the title says. So he's going to present to you. He was part of our group. Alhamdulillah, he's not able to be here, but he's going to present to you virtually from a video what he presented to the students. And then, inshallah, we'll have Sheikh Omar talk about the Islamic aspects of this. Yes, we good? Yeah. So, all right, so go ahead.
I don't know. That's probably the safest bet. We just don't know. So I hope that answered your question, inshallah. Yeah, it's a great question, though, yeah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. First and foremost, I'd like to apologize for not being there in person. Unfortunately, there's a lot of complications on the administrative side of things. And so I have to sit in Dubai and give this lecture 12 hours ahead. But inshallah, not a problem. I'll try to be as engaging as possible to the course of the seminar. And yeah, let's try and get through the science of evolution without boring you guys to death, inshallah. Okay, so working off of what Sheikh Omar mentioned in the previous session, my job here is to kind of give you an overview of the science of evolution. And then the plan is to kind of put these two conversations together to see what we as Muslims can and cannot accept. The theory of evolution, as most of you may know from APA biology, or if you do other courses, be it in GCSEs or A-levels, it starts off with a well-known individual called Charles Darwin. Darwin's name appears now everywhere when it comes to biology, and it'd be very difficult to study biology without understanding his initial conception. Now, just to make it clear, historically speaking, Darwin wasn't actually the first person to come up with the theory of evolution. There were many people before him who had the idea. What made Darwin's idea significant was the specific emphasis that he gave on a process. Previously, people wouldn't be able to explain how evolution occurred, but he really kind of gave a mechanism to try to explain how we can address the diversity we see in the world today, as well as in our past history. So he traveled a lot. He went through some of the areas in South America. He traveled for about 10 years. And then even when he was back in the UK, samples were sent to him from his colleagues from all around the world. And using the process of induction, he was able to generalize and extrapolate that there is a process of evolution going on. And there's a fantastic website dedicated to his diaries, in which you can see the progression of his thought over the years. So the current conception of evolution and Darwinism is not exactly the same as what he thought of back in 1859. Remember, we're now 150 years ahead. We've had several scientific advancements since then. And so what I'm giving you here is what we understand as evolution today. There are some key differences, but this is a modern conception of evolution. Now, in evolution, you can study a lot of different things. You can even do a whole undergraduate, an MSc degree, even a PhD. And so there's a lot of stuff that you can include and a lot of stuff that you can exclude. But for the sake of brevity, and given that we only have 50 minutes or so, my job is to try and make this as accessible for everyone so we can have a conversation about how this relates to our theology. Now, evolution can be broken down to three basic propositions. These are deep time, common ancestry, and mechanisms. Now, when I had this presentation in mind, I wanted to engage with everybody, but because everybody's now a pixel for me right now, I can't really do that. But yeah, I'm assuming that you have a rough idea what these are, but if not, don't worry, we'll go through each of these in just a moment. These three propositions are enough to help you think about the theological positions that Sheikh Omar mentioned in the previous session. And so we don't need to go any further than this. But if you do want to get further into details, there are plenty of references that we can provide you later down the line. So let's start off with the first proposition, deep time. This is the simple concept that the Earth is really, really, really old, at least in comparison to what we previously held to believe. So if you rewind the clock back to 200 years or more, people generally believed, I'm talking about mostly the Abrahamic faiths, Jews, Muslims, and Christians, the general conception was that the Earth was around 6,000 to 10,000 years old. And these were largely based off of estimates from the Bible. With the advancements in science, and particularly radioactivity, we were actually able to push that date back further into the magnitudes of 1 billion years. So according to our current estimates, the Earth is around 4.6 billion years old. On this rock, we've been able to detect life forms that are stretched back to 3.5 billion years old. So I don't know if you can see my mouse, but that's on the very left. And then over time, we begin to see development of a variety of species. And so the first principle of evolution is time. The Earth is really, really old. It's significantly older than what we initially held to be. Now, how do scientists determine that? Is this qat'i or is this dhanni? So there's a lot of ways in which scientists measure the age of the Earth. Most of this is done through rock samples. So you have specific rocks. You do some measurements based on. Okay, all right. Okay, so sorry, I just got a message. I was just reading. So yeah, so most of these are based on measurements of rocks, and we usually use ratios of isotopes embedded in those rocks. And if we know the properties of those isotopes, we can do some calculations and see how far back this goes in terms of its age. Generally it's understood that there's a 1% error range. So whenever you have a reading from a rock, you can add up plus minus 1%, right? So let's say if you have 10 million years as a reading of a particular rock sample, plus 1% would be 11 million years, minus 1% would be 9 million years. That means the range of this rock is between 11 to 9 million years old. For those of you who are interested in the history of science, like I am, this is an excellent book on the right-hand side, The Age of the Earth by Brent Dalrymple. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but I'm assuming that made sense. So this is a book that he published in 1994. It's a little bit technical. If you're interested in a more accessible book, he's published the same title, but in 2012. Pick whatever you prefer. But this is an excellent resource on the historical development of how we come to understand the age of the Earth. Right. So we now have an idea of what the first principle is. Let's move on to common ancestry, right? Common ancestry is the second principle of evolution of New Darwinism, right? So generally speaking, all of us are used to this concept of a family tree, right? We have parents, our parents have parents, they have parents, and so on and so on and so on, right? And in order to kind of show that visually, what we do is like have a family tree. And we put these decorations in all spaces of our houses, right? So I have one, my parents have one, my grandparents have one, and we can see who's connected to whom and how these generations are linked together. Evolution takes that exact same concept, but instead of individuals, it applies it to entire species. According to theory of evolution, all biological life is connected together across a long period of time, and you can put them into, quote unquote, figuratively speaking, a tree of life. Now, it is important to clarify a few things here because sometimes students misunderstand a few things about the origins of species versus the origins of life. These are two different scientific areas. The study of how the first life form was made is abiogenesis. And you have a group of scientists dedicated to this field trying to understand how that first life form kicked off. Whether it's the first cellular assembly, the protein machinery, all of that is under this territory of abiogenesis. The origins of species is the realm of evolution. So that's why if you pick up Charles Darwin's book from 1859, it's called The Origins of Species. Sorry, can you hear me? Can everyone still hear me? Okay, good, okay. So the origins, that's why his book is called The Origins of Species, not The Origins of Life. So just to make that distinction crystal clear, the origin of life is how that first life form started, right? And the origin of species is everything in that blue box. We're trying to understand how species emerge historically and how we can explain them today, right? So that's the discussion of common ancestry. So just so I can get an idea of the class, just a quick thumbs up if everyone's okay and following me. Just a quick thumbs up from the class. Yay, good. Okay, very cool. Right, good stuff. Cool. Now the question is this qat'i or dhanni? Is this idea in evolution, is this absolute? Like, is it like something that scientists are completely sold by? And so there are a couple of questions that make the discussion of common ancestry fall under certainty. And these are due to how you manage the construction of trees. So scientists cannot, go back in time and analyze species that are extinct or measure 3.5 billion years like you can do with experiments that you do in the lab. They have to use a lot of inferences based on current traces and then project them onto the past. And because of this, sometimes there are methodological disagreements in how you construct those trees. So one group of scientists will say, maybe this particular species came first, that came second. Another group will say no, and they may have their respective scientific disagreements. There are questions about whether there is just one tree or there are multiple trees involved, right? And constantly this happens in science, that we always see that scientists sometimes revise the placement of species in light of new knowledge. So as we, uncover new fossils, discover new data, it better informs us, and so we can sometimes revise certain things that we held in the past. And there's an excellent paper, there's a really good paper that maps all these conversations in very accessible language. So even if you're just, a high school student, you can understand this relatively well. It's called Pattern, Pluralism, and the Tree of Life Hypothesis. And it's written by Ford Doolittle and Eric Baptiste, right? It's an excellent paper, and you can find online for free. So the question of whether this is qat'i or dhanni, I would say that it would fall in the category of dhanni. It's still kind of an open exploration. Largely put, all evolutionary biologists do work with the idea that, common ancestry has occurred, but they disagree about how that occurred. What is the pattern of common ancestry, right? Again, just a quick show of hands. All good, everyone? Yep, everyone following so far? Yay, good stuff, cool. Right, so that's the definition of common ancestry. All biological life is interconnected through a long historical lineage like a family tree. We then move on to the very last principle, which are the mechanisms involved, right? So in the specific rendition of neo-Darwinism, and I'm working off of what Sheikh Omar said in his session, we're specifically looking at neo-Darwinism. Why the emphasis on this will be made clear shortly after this. But according to neo-Darwinism, there are two main mechanisms involved that explain how different species emerge. The first one is random mutation, right? So here you have a very simple diagram. You have a person on the very right-hand side. Just for my sake, because sometimes this doesn't show up. Can all of you see a photo? Yeah, all of you can see a photo? Yeah, okay, good. So on the very right-hand side, you have an individual, right? And you can see the phenotypic traits, so this is what you can observe. And then that individual is broken down into particular organs, right? So the heart, the lungs, the brain, etc. Those organs are made of more fundamental units called a cell. And the most basic and important biological unit is your DNA, your genes, right? Mutations are simply this idea that when we have genetics crossovers, right, over successive generations, mutations occur all the time. These may be due to sometimes copying errors, or when people reproduce, the way they reproduce is based on various kinds of mutative processes and genes that may have errors in them, and that's what you see in the offspring. So if you have the same people having multiple kids, sometimes they'll have the properties of the dad, sometimes they'll have the properties of the mom, sometimes a mix, sometimes neither. It all depends on how the genes mix up. And these are based off of mutations, right? And there are several kinds of mutations that occur, but fundamentally speaking, these genetic units do mix in very probabilistic measures. And what I mean by that is simply not that, oh, it's just appearing out of thin air. It means that when we try to understand which part of the genes from the mom and which part of the genes from the dad mix up to make the offspring, that is not something we can absolutely calculate. So when we, for example, when we throw a ball, if we know the initial speed, we know the initial angle, we can do a pretty good job in explaining where it will land, how far it will land, what the speed will be. That's very clear. But when it comes to genes, it's very difficult. To give you a more intuitive analog, think of a coin toss, right? A coin has only two sides that it can land on, heads or tails, right? But on a specific toss, you cannot say with absolute certainty which side it will land on. The same thing goes here. When two people reproduce and pass on their DNA to their offspring, we cannot say with absolute certainty which genetic components are going to move forward onto the offspring. So that's what we mean by mutations here, that this is a problem in terms of having proper lack of insight and full understanding of the mechanism. So mutations mostly mean that there's a probability involved, and we assign probability distributions to make sense of what kind of things can be passed on from the parent generation to the offspring generation. So I said a lot of heavy words there. Everyone okay with me so far? Yep. Okay, very good. Mashallah. Hands are now like slowly getting up. I think everyone's getting tired. Okay, so let's move on to natural selection, right? Again, very simple process, nothing too difficult here. Natural selection is this idea that if you take a given species into a particular environment, they have to adapt to that environment. Otherwise, they're going to pass away, right? They're going to die out. They're going to go extinct. So this is a very simple concept explained using these three diagrams in front of you. Let's start with the left-hand side. On the very left, we have mice on the ground, or rodents, right? And you have a very dark landscape. And you have two kinds of rodents in there. You have dark-colored rodents, and you have light-colored rodents, right? And you have a predator. Think of an eagle, whatever have you, right? So from the predator's point of view, the one that it can easily observe are the light-colored rodents, right? The dark-colored rodents are camouflaged. So they're very suited to living and surviving in that environment. Now, over time, and you move on to the second image, what happens is that the light-colored rodents, their subpopulation eventually decreases. And if this goes on even more successively, the average color of the mice becomes inclines more towards being dark-colored, because the mice that are surviving, or the rodents that are surviving, are carrying the gene of being dark. And those are the ones that are helpful for survival in this particular environment. Now, if you take the same set of mice and you move them to Antarctica, for example, where the terrain is absolutely white, right? Dark mice are going to have a really hard time living there. Predators are able to see them much more effectively than they can see the white rodents. So natural selection is simply this, that the environment you're in is a sieve, and species can either make through it and survive, and if they don't or can't, they will die off. And that's natural selection in a nutshell. Is everyone okay so far? Yep, everyone got that? Yep, cool, very good. Now, when we talk about these mechanisms, so we talked about qat'i dhanni, about deep time. We talk about qat'i dhanni regarding common ancestry. What about these two mechanisms? Are they qat'i or dhanni, right? And so again here, there is a debate amongst evolutionary biologists. And this is a seminal landmark paper in the discussion about the mechanisms. So, and this is a very famous paper. If you just type this on Google, you'll find it everywhere. And this was published by Nature, a top-tier journal. If you want to become famous in the scientific community, Nature is where you want to publish. And so this paper was called, "Does Evolutionary Theory Need a Rethink?" Researchers are divided over what processes, what processes should be considered fundamental. So neo-Darwinism says that the primary two mechanisms are natural selection and random mutations. So that's one camp, the neo-Darwinist camp. There is another camp, and this is now a more recent and growing camp called the extended evolutionary synthesis, or the third way. And these group of scientists, I think there are about 2,000 now in total in the world, they're saying that random mutations and natural selection are not adequate in explaining certain things that we see in explaining evolution. And so both of these camps came together and they wrote this piece together. From the Darwinist side, you see, from the Darwinist side, you say, no, all is well. Neo-Darwinism is fine as it is. From the new camp that's coming out, the extended evolutionary synthesis, they wrote the left column, yes, urgently, right? So they say without an extended evolutionary framework. So there is a healthy discussion going on amongst evolutionary biologists with respect to the mechanisms involved. This paper was published in 2014, which is 8 years ago. So this is still a healthy live debate. So can we say that this is qat'i or dhanni? The mechanisms are not qat'i at the moment. And it seems to, we may be seeing a development in evolution where perhaps natural selection, random mutation may either be coupled with other processes or may even be replaced with other processes. So this is an open question for now. But what's very clear is this is not qat'i. It is not certain at the moment. All good? Everyone okay with that so far? Yep. Okay, great. MashaAllah. Very good. So let's put it all together, right? So we said that evolution has 3 basic principles. You've got deep time, common ancestry, and then you've got the mechanism involved, right? Random mutations and natural selection. It is these 3 things that make up neo-Darwinism. But as we stated earlier, right, that neo-Darwinism may be under a shift to maybe a new paradigm because of the mechanisms involved. And so that's why we should be careful that evolution is not the same thing as neo-Darwinism. Extended evolutionary synthesis and neo-Darwinists both believe in evolution. They're divided over the processes. But for the sake of this seminar, we're just taking the mainstream position, which is of neo-Darwinism. Okay, so with respect to the principles, and Sheikh Omar, you can maybe help me with this in case I don't hear. Are there any questions from the class with regards to the first 3 principles that we looked at? No.
Right, that's it. No, we're fine. No questions so far.
Okay, very good. Okay, cool. That works for me. Alhamdulillah. All right. Okay. Now that we've kind of covered the principles of evolution, let's do a quick analysis about the evidence, right? Because it's one thing to understand, what is it that defines evolution, and then the other thing is to understand how is it substantiated. And again, there are many things that can be looked at, but for the sake of simplicity and time, I'm just going to look at 3 basic things. So these include the fossil record, homology, and genetics, right? So the fossil record, for those unaware, is simply this idea that the Earth is layered, right? So there are layers of terrain, and as you drill further into the ground, the deeper back in time you go, right? And if you see all the fossils that we've uncovered so far, you can actually kind of tell a story. For those of you in the States, right, you have this, you really can see this quite clearly in the Grand Canyon. It's quite a beautiful sight to see. We can't see it in the Middle East. Nothing like that exists in the Middle East. It's a sand all the way through, right? But it's quite a beautiful view in Grand Canyon. And there have been predictions that were made by scientists with respect to what kind of things we should observe and what kind of properties they should have. Because remember, the fossil record is not, a picture-perfect narrative. There are gaps in the record, and every year we discover new fossils that help us understand the fossil record better, but also re-question our assumptions and even our placement of these species, where they fit and how they fit. So one of the things that scientists were missing was this idea of how did, fish-like entities, morph into tetrapods, things that could walk. And there was a guess that in the range of 350 to about 400 million years or thereabouts, there was a species, or there were groups of species rather, that would have properties of both entities that could kind of live underwater, but also had like semi-limb structures. And there was a scientist who wanted to see if he could find, something to that effect. And it was Neil Shubin is a scientist, if I remember correctly, from Canada. And so he went to a specific site where you had like rocks dated to about that time period. And after 4 years of intensive research, and he's about to give up, but in the 4th year, he found the Tiktaalik. And this was a massive discovery. So the Tiktaalik is very interesting because it fits kind of the properties that we would expect that has properties of both sea life, being able to breathe on water, as well as these tetrapod structures to be able to have basic limbs. It had, from what we could infer, basic primitive lung systems, which shows the initial developments of tetrapods. And so this was a massive discovery. The conception that we had, and where there was a gap in the record, this kind of worked into that theory. Now, of course, does this mean that this is absolute? Not necessarily. I mean, just over the past 4 or 5 years, I've seen articles which have pushed the date of this even further back. So again, this is one of the things that I'd like to emphasize is some of these things are based on inferences, and they're not necessarily absolute in their fixtures. Scientists constantly revise these things in light of new knowledge. And so it's hard to kind of sometimes say, is this absolute or not? But what is absolute is that this was a game changer in the field of trying to explain at least one gap, the shift from sea species to land-oriented species. The second kind of evidence is homology, right? And homology is just the study of similarities. Now, I was going to do a group exercise. Actually, we can do this as a group exercise, if I'm not mistaken. Sheikh Omar, are you ready to coordinate? I don't know if you've disappeared again. Is he still around? Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm making you walk. I'm so sorry. I'm very sorry. Okay. Is he around? Okay. Sheikh Omar, evolutionary fitness, yeah. So we can do this. Right. Sheikh Omar, so can you just ask I'm assuming there are like a couple of tables here. So each table is a group. Just ask them to discuss as a team in 2 minutes what they think each one is. They have to guess the animal. And then we'll come back together after 2 minutes and see which table won. All of you got the bat part right, which is very interesting. The bat is right. That the fourth one is a bat. The first one is a human being. The second one is the limb of a dog. That's the limb of a dog. And the third one is a whale's fin, not a dolphin's fin, very interestingly. So, well done for trying. Now, the purpose of this exercise was to show you that, immediately with these things, you correlate, a couple of different options in your head, right? So for the first one, some people said monkey, some people said human beings, right? And that falls back into the common ancestry of humans and chimpanzees, which we'll look into shortly. For the second one, you thought of, someone said a horse. I don't see a horse in there, but horse, dog, cat, right? So we see that here. And the third one, dolphin, and a few other things related to that. But all of you got bad, mashallah. Bad was the clearest. So homology is the study of similarity of traits. And what evolutionary biologists, yeah, Sheikh Hassan, yeah.
You have 5 minutes.
Is that a high five? Oh, I thought you were giving me a high five, like you're doing good. Sorry, my bad. Sorry, my bad. Okay, sorry. So yeah, I've got 5 minutes, and I'm going to end in 5 minutes, right? So a homology is the very simple study of measuring trait similarities, right? So if you see from this diagram, which was very patiently drawn by my designer, so you see it's kind of color coded in black and white. So you have this black elongated part of the arm, right, which is basically part of this arm part here. You see the same thing in the dog, and you've got a shorter version in the whale, and it's kind of long and thin, however, for the bat. The gray part is your forearm here, and you can see the analogs of those in both the dog, the dolphin, and the bat. And using such structural similarities, what evolutionary biologists do, and they feed this information to computational algorithms, right? And using a lot of different fancy mathematics, they try to come up and suggest how these are related in a family tree. of course, the more similar they look, the more recent their common ancestor. The more differentiated they look, the further back their common ancestor. And so homology is a way of studying and placing species on the tree of life. Now, before genetics, a lot of this most of this had varying subjective elements to it. And so it was very difficult to kind of fixate where species fit in. But once genetics came to the picture, things improved much more radically, because it's no longer about he says, she says, right? I mean, all of you differed about how you place these things. But genetics is, I think, a much more accessible language for scientists, and it allows better comparison and therefore better placement of species. Now, we're going to have a short break because you guys have to go off for your salah, inshallah. After that, we're going to look at the third piece of evidence, which is genetics, and then we'll conclude session 2 and then work our way towards how do you understand the interface between Islam and evolution. All right, guys? So go on and have your break, inshallah, and I'll see you shortly after, I think it's 15 minutes, inshallah. All right? Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Part of the discussion on Islam and evolution. So just to kind of pull everyone back together to the topic that we were on, we were looking at the evidence for the theory of evolution, and we had a brief talk about the fossil record and the discoveries made therein. We also had a group exercise about homology, right? And one more thing I wanted to just give you an example of before we moved on to the third piece of evidence, which is genetics. Is this is a very recent finding, and I thought it'd be cool to show you this. So these are 2 embryos, right? And the one on the right-hand side is a modern-day chicken, right? And the one on the left-hand side is a rendition of a dinosaur egg. So in paleontology and archaeology in general, finding fossilized eggs is extremely rare. It's very, very rare. And the reason why this was interesting as a finding is because one of the things that comes out as an extension of evolutionary biology is that contemporary birds, so modern day birds, modern day chickens, right? They are descendants of dinosaurs, believe it or not. And if they do share common ancestry, one of the things that we would expect as a result of that are shared features, not just in makeup, but also in embryological aspects as well. So if you look at the chicken, the legs are tucked in and the head is facing towards the legs. And that's what we see with a dinosaur egg. And so what's interesting, the story of this dinosaur egg is that this was found about 20 years ago, right? And it was just tucked away in a closet. People didn't know what to make of it. And just 15 years later, so we're talking about in 2015, people realized, hang on, this is an actual dinosaur egg. And then this study came out quite recently, a couple of years ago. Now, just as a point of caution, this is what we actually observe, right? So this is how the fossilized egg looks like. But the rendition is what appears on the left-hand side. And the reason why it's important to highlight that is because is to make sure that you guys are aware that raw data and inferential interpretations are 2 different things. So how you go from this to this is always it's always good to keep in mind, right? So again, that's an extension of homology. Now the main piece of evidence, and this is where I'd like to conclude at least my session, is discussion of genetics. Now you've heard the discussion about human origins, right? Insan and Bashar and Banu Adam from Sheikh Omar's session. From the perspective of evolutionary biology, the claim goes that human beings, so contemporary modern-day human beings, which are classed as Homo sapiens and chimpanzees share a common ancestor. So in case this isn't clear, you know that tree of life that I showed you that was sprouting upwards? Just tilt that 90 degrees to the side, right? And according to the theory of evolution, approximately about 7 million years ago-ish, thereabouts, there was a common ancestor, and then there was a split. One led to the development of modern-day chimpanzees. The other line led to the development of Homo sapiens. During that line, or in the progression of that line, we see various kinds of human-looking entities, right? So you go from more ape-like, or sorry, more chimp-like entities to more human-like entities. So Australopithecus is one, Haublus is one, Homo erectus, Heidelbergensis, Neanderthalensis, right? So all of these entities, if you put their skulls on a table, some of them are so similar you wouldn't be able to differentiate one from the other. It's difficult, at least for the layperson, to do so. Now, again, you could put the skulls on a table and you could say, okay, maybe it's just a matter of degree or interpretation. But then this is where genetics becomes a very important source of evidence. And what I wanted to do was show you a video. So one of the things that
Okay. The video basically shows that very similar DNA percentages between various creatures. That's all. He's online?
Yeah, he's on. Tell him that we can start.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Omar. The floor is yours. If you can hear us. And you can show your slides.
Mhm.
Alaikum. Yes, I can hear everybody. Are you ready to start?
Yes, it's you, mashallah. Bismillah.
All right, Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
I'm gonna switch to this guy so that when people need to talk. We'll use this one. I can help with doing it.
Can everybody see the slide deck?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Hey, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam ajma'in, rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam ajma'in. Can everyone hear as well? Okay, alhamdulillah. So yes, you just finished viewing a nice overview of evolution and some of the assumptions that go into evolution and some of the major claims that evolutionary biologists make that are relevant to or have impact or implications for different faiths and theological claims. And so what we'll do in this session here is focus specifically on one of the more salient points of impact, you could say, or and that is regarding the human being, and specifically regarding the origins of the human species, and what is it that so in this presentation, what we want to do, inshallah, is to kind of highlight what are the salient doctrines that we as Muslims hold regarding human beings, the human species, and then look at some points, some other specific points, such as this idea of similarity, and what does similarity entail, and what can we infer, like Dr. Shoaib mentioned in his video, that there's data, right, and then there's inferences from that data, and we shouldn't conflate the two. Right, that's a very important aspect of scientific understanding, and a lot of times we lose that a very important point in where we conflate inferences with data, and because when it comes to inferences, those are entirely activities that's an act of human beings, and it's an act of reasoning. And when it comes to reasoning, then we're looking at premises and conclusions. And not all of those premises and conclusions are in the data itself. Those are coming from other sources, and so that's a very important distinction that we have to keep in mind. And so we'll look at the second issue of similarities, and what can we not infer from similarities. And that's building off the concept of homology as well. So inshallah, we'll be able to give an account of neo-Darwinian evolution, describe and explain the theological account of non-humans and humans, describe, categorize, and evaluate various Muslim responses to neo-Darwinian evolution, and describe, distinguish, and evaluate various kinds of conflicts, right, between Islam and evolution. So, just way of introduction, Muslim positions on evolution. There's a study that was done regarding, it was interviewing various physicians, and this one was looking at Pakistani physicians in the United States, and it was asking them a series of questions about that relate to our topic today. So one of the questions that was asked was, do you accept or reject the theory of evolution? And what was interesting was of these Pakistani physicians, right, it was a relatively small sample size, but nonetheless, it's important data to consider. Majority of them accepted the theory of evolution, and very few rejected it. And there's a smaller, a bit larger percentage of number of students or physicians who kind of were agnostic. Now, what did it mean? Like there are obviously further questions, part of the issues with surveys. What's their conception of evolution? What do they, and how do they understand evolution in terms of applying to all species or not? Those were questions that obviously need to be asked, but in general, this is something to keep in mind. But a more specific question was asked, and are humans a product of evolution from prior animals, right? And the same group of physicians, we kind of see the similar results here. A large number of them said yes, right? And a certain number, about half of that number said yes, said no to this very important question here. And this obviously is a question about the origins of humans. So whether human beings are arrive, or the origins of human beings are the same as any other living being, every other living organism. Do they come about through Darwinian evolutionary mechanisms or not, right? That's a very important, lively question that we'll be looking at today, inshallah. But this is kind of how this subgroup of people, physicians, have answered this question. Let me put this here. Similarly, there was another study done of undergraduate biology students, Muslim biology students. And what they found here is they asked them a different study. They asked them a series of questions. And in those questions, what they shared with them was some of the findings were that they found that Muslim students, this is in the United States, Muslim students are less accepting of evolution as compared to other religious groups. But they are slightly more accepting of evolution compared to Protestants, right? And students of the Mormons, right? Students of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So that's an interesting comparative data point. Additionally, among these Muslim students, there was a higher understanding of evolution and a lower religiosity, right? So the more someone understood evolution, and there was another factor, they found a correlation between lower religiosity. When those two are combined, there's a higher acceptance of evolution amongst those students. So, this is a, nice, another further detail to keep in mind as we looked at this. And then they found that across different measures, evolution acceptance, higher religiosity was a stronger negative predictor of human evolution acceptance, right? So the more religious a person was, and that could be interpreted in different ways, but there was a less acceptance of human evolution and also of common ancestry of life on Earth. Then the acceptance of microevolution. So they're making a distinction between macro and microevolution, and the more religious these students, of course, it's something that is self-reported, the more religious they found themselves, the less accepting of human evolution was found. There are, curricular interventions that were made and suggested in these studies. So, obviously the goal was of these group of individuals where they had their own concerns. And so they were all aimed at what are better ways we can teach evolution and better ways that we can increase the acceptance of evolution and evolutionary accounts of human beings amongst all populations, and here Muslims. So they said that we should provide examples of Muslim scientists who accept evolution. So if they see a role model, then and they come into class or they hear about role models, they listen to their lectures of Muslim scientists, and they find out that they accept evolution, then this will make it easier for them to accept evolution. Again, this is kind of a very interesting intervention, a curricular intervention that they're suggesting here, because they're not really based on evidence or questions. It's based on, based on an individual, based on authority. It's very interesting. How scientific is that is the question, right? The second intervention they recommended was to teach the scientific process in evolutionary biology as agnostic, right? In other words, on the question of God, evolution has nothing to say, which is, can you do that or can you not? I think that's a very contested question, right? Because one of the key assumptions of Darwinian evolution or neo-Darwinian evolution as it's taught now is this idea of a naturalism, right? A metaphysical naturalism that underpins much of evolutionary biology. So the implications of metaphysical naturalism, what they're saying here is that it doesn't have any implications on the question of God's existence. And that's a highly contested question and position to take regarding metaphysical naturalism, which underpins evolutionary biology. So this group of individuals felt that there was no implication of such, and you can teach evolutionary biology as basically avoiding and not dealing and not relating to the question of God and his existence. The other approach, intervention, was to discuss potential compatibility between religion and evolution. And so here is to provide different ways in how Muslim scholars and even non-Muslim scholars have sought to reconcile, right, the standard account of evolution and any types of tension it may play between religious beliefs. And what's interesting here is that they're actually recommending for Muslim community how to interpret, right, their religious text. And they're saying, well, a literal interpretation may not be compatible, but we can provide other interpretations, right, that present Adam and Eve as not real figures, but archetypal individuals, or they're archetypes that are supposed to be there. They weren't real historical figures. We can have recourse to symbolic interpretations of passages of scripture where they are in conflict. So that's another curricular intervention that they have recommended here. So you can see here it's a very interesting issue in terms of how it manifests itself amongst medical students, how it manifests itself in the world of education, the teaching of medical students as well, and what are the different approaches that how do people see the problem, and then what are the approaches to providing solutions for that problem are. So having said that, one thing that we need to keep in mind as Muslims and Muslim scientists and physicians as well, science educators, is that not all creedal doctrines are of the same strength and are of the same importance. In other words, there's a hierarchy of our Aqidah and things that we do believe. And so many Muslim scholars have sought to provide a five-fold classification scheme of doctrines. And so one of the most important questions we need to ask ourselves is, this is something we are required to believe in. The question is, what category does it fall under, right? And just because it's a theological doctrine, that doesn't necessarily entail that it's required for us as Muslims to believe in it or and to know about it. Most theological doctrines do fall, are required to know, and they're well known amongst Muslims. But it's important to keep in mind that there is a classification scheme. There is a hierarchy of doctrines and categories, and each doctrine must be placed in its correct category. Now, even which category it falls under, you might find scholarly dispute amongst them, but that's natural as well. But the first category is doctrines for which a lack of knowledge. So they're differentiating between this classification scheme does differentiate between not knowing something, like having a lack of knowledge, and denying something. So those are two different principles, right? not having knowledge of something is just being ignorant of something. Whereas denying something entails that you know it, so there's no ignorance there, but so you do know it, but you actually do not deem it to be true. And so those are two important distinctions that need to be kept in mind as we understand and explore these classification of creedal doctrines. So here, if there's a doctrine not knowing it, having a lack of knowledge does entail unbelief, kufr, on the person. So in other words, these are things that every Muslim has to actually know, and they can't, and not knowing it is problematic. So doctrines that fall into this category are things like God exists, right? You can't say I don't know God exists, right? Or God being one. And other of his essential attributes, things like God's power, God's knowledge, God's will, the fact that God is Allah Ta'ala is a mutakallim, that he speaks, and other such things. That falls in this first category, lack of knowledge is problematic here, right? And the consequences of that. Then there are other set of doctrines. I don't know why I showed up like that, but category 2 are doctrines whose rejection, and that's a key point here. So now we're not talking about lack of knowledge, but we're talking about rejection. So a person knows this particular doctrine, but yet they reject it after knowledge of it. This doesn't entail kufr, but it entails a bid'ah, like it's a grave heretical innovation and is considered sinful. Rejection now. So doctrines that fall under this category are those doctrines that are established by the plain sense of the Quran and Sunnah, those doctrines which the early Muslim community, the Salaf, have accepted. Right, so understanding the Quran and Sunnah in the way the Salaf, the early Muslim community, has understood it, and rejecting that particular understanding, that entails a bid'ah, right? A heretical innovation, and is considered sinful. A person is still a Muslim, though, right? In the second category. The third category are doctrines whose denial entails unbelief. So if a person, again, denial here, entails unbelief, but not knowing them is considered merely sinful. Again, this distinction, we're seeing it come up in all categories, and this is important. So what are doctrines that fall into this category? Things like Allah Ta'ala being eternal, his qidam, right? Not having a beginning, and that everything other than Allah Ta'ala is hadith or temporally originated. And majority of our creedal doctrines kind of fall under this category. Again, whose denial entails unbelief, but at the same time, whose lack of knowledge is not unbelief, but is considered sinful. Excuse me. Category 4, doctrines whose rejection constitutes a minor heretical innovation, a sin. And if a person rejects these, it's a sin, and it's the person's still a Muslim, and they should be taught what the correct doctrine is, and eventually work with individual to help them understand and teach them to accept the doctrine. But it's considered a heretical innovation, but a minor one, and is considered sinful. But they're still a Muslim from this category. And the final doctrine category is doctrines they're based on, when you see different verses of the Quran and different hadith, and the apparent sense, the plain sense of these verses are in conflict with each other. And then scholars have come throughout from the Sahaba's time all the way up until this time, and they've tried to give interpretations, ijtihad, to resolve these apparent conflicting evidences. And so this is the area of ijtihad. And here, if a person they can, accepting one position or the other. It doesn't entail disbelief. It doesn't entail any type of sin. It doesn't entail any type of heretical innovation. And so what's an example from this fifth category? Things like, did the Prophet ﷺ see Allah Ta'ala on Isra and Mi'raj, right? And the Mi'raj. Here, even from the Sahaba's time, they differed, right, on this issue. Say that Aisha held no. She said that the Prophet ﷺ did not see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Mi'raj, whereas many of the other companions actually said no, he did. And she invoked certain verses of the Quran, and they invoked different verses of the Quran. So here you have this, apparent conflict here. And so Sayyidah Aisha resolved it in one way, and the other companions, Ibn Abbas and others, resolved it in another way. This is an example of what falls under category 5, right? Now, throughout history, right, there may be a correct opinion, so there may be a difference of opinion and dispute at a certain time period, but later scholars have decided that amongst that dispute, there is there is a more correct opinion and one that's stronger in terms of evidence. Another example is the son of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. We all know that the son that he was commanded to sacrifice, that's something that we commonly believe as Sunni Muslims, that it was Sayyidina Ismail alayhi salam. However, there is actually a dispute from the time of the companions. Many companions, Sayyidina Ali and others, held it was actually Ishaq, right, alayhi salam. And so there's different proofs for both positions. And yet, what majority of Sunni Muslims hold is that is Ismail. That's definitely a valid position. That's an ijtihad of scholars, though. And other companions of the Prophet ﷺ had a different ijtihad. So that's another example that will fall under category 5. So keeping this in mind, right, whenever we're looking at this issue of a conflict between religion and science, we do have to, first of all, ascertain what the doctrine is and then try to categorize it, according to this particular classification scheme here. And so that's important to keep in mind. I remember presenting this classification scheme to certain Catholic theologians as well. And they were actually very happy with this. They were like, "This is great, that you guys have this." And they said they also identified that the Catholic teachings have some type of a similar classification of doctrines as well. So it was really nice. We were kind of exchanging notes, so to speak, on what's the principles in which they developed their classifications of creedal doctrines and what our principles were. All right, so having said that, let's kind of move to let's get to, we have this framework. Let's move to what are doctrinal teachings about humankind that are in the Quran. And most of these will fall under category 2 or category 1, and things like that. So they're pretty important. There are many things that we can believe that the Quran and the Sunnah have mentioned about human beings, whether on this world or the hereafter or in the barzakh. But not all fall under categories 1 or 2, right, or 3. So these, what I've kind of done, and just follow scholars who have kind of said these are really the essential doctrines that most of the essential doctrines that we need to believe in as Muslims when we're answering this question about human origins, especially in light of evolutionary accounts. So one is the place and rank of humans in God's creation, right? This doctrine is that humans are the most superior and noble of God's creation, right? So this is one very important point that we believe about human beings, and there's a lot of different proofs, and these are pretty much agreed upon by scholars. Although one might be some difference of opinion, but that difference of opinion is not that considerable here. The second is what humans are made from, and human origin. So the doctrine is that humans are created from dust, turab. Okay, that's explicitly mentioned in the Quran, right? And are multiple, meaning like where does the multiplicity of humans come from? Well, humans are multiple from their origin, meaning the first human, Adam alayhi salam. So this is something that another important point of doctrine we need to keep in mind as we explore this question. The third point of doctrine is that we're talking here about the physical form of human beings. So are there teachings in the Quran about the actual physical form of human beings? And the doctrine is that, and the answer is yes, and the doctrine is that human beings, since their creation, have been created by God and in the best and the most beautiful of physical and spiritual forms. And this is taken from the verse in Surah At-Tin, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, right? So we created man in the best, most beautiful conformation, right? So the actual human form, there's something to be said about the human form, and it's not incidental to what it means to be human, right? So the physical form is something that the Quran emphasizes, and not just the physical form, but then also the qualities, right, and the attributes, and the capacities that a human being can do. These other type of spirit, we can say, non-material or immaterial forms or immaterial attributes, have something also to do. So it's both, and that's how the companions explained this particular verse, that it applies to the actual physical form of human beings and the spiritual forms. Now, this particular doctrine is very interesting because it gets into issues about, changing human physical form. There's, through the advances of surgery and technology and in that area, the technological advances, should we, right, be altering the physical form of human beings? And the jurists discuss this issue quite a bit and quite frequently. There's a lot of literature on this. That's a very important doctrine when we're considering this question of human origins, because early, according to evolutionary accounts of human origins, the physical form is actually not the same as our current physical form, right? And so, do we call them human, right? Based off of that. So that's something to keep in mind here. Related to this point is that the human form, being as it is, because Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ, so He created human forms. So what this means is that the human form itself did not result from the process of, we could say, evolution, because from prior living beings, because evolutionary accounts hold that the human being was kind of a gradual, unguided process, unintended process, right? And it came this current human form had its origins in prior living beings, and those living beings did not have, or they had forms, of course, but they were imperfect forms when comparing to the human, and eventually and gradually led to the current human forms, current form that humans have. And then it also means in the future that form can also change, right? So there's a type of fluidity that the Darwinian account embeds, right, and brings to the table, and how we interpret our current human form. We have a very different understanding based on the Quran here. And this is kind of a non-negotiable doctrine, right? Rather, humans possess this form from the very first human. This is what we believe, is that the very first human, Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, possessed this particular physical form, right? It wasn't like done through a gradual process in any way. So this doctrine falls under category 2 based on the epistemological strength of the proof of this position. The other important doctrine about human beings is that humans did not evolve from another species. Based on these 3 doctrines, it is necessary for Muslims to believe that humans have not gradually transformed throughout their entire history from any species evolution, right? Meaning a prior living being. In other words, this is kind of the human creation is called a special creation, and it was kind of sui generis, right? It was the human beings were created, and this is clear from the text of the Quran and the Sunnah, that it wasn't through any, it wasn't like Allah Ta'ala took a prior living thing and just kind of modified it and things like this to reach the human form, right? It was created sui generis, like its own original category. So these are 4 important doctrines. There are some other doctrines too, but for the purposes of our presentation, we're going to highlight these 4, and because they're very relevant to our conversation today. So how are Muslim thinkers, and I'm using the word Muslim thinkers because not that everybody here that we're going to talk about is necessarily like a scholar, an alim, right, a theologian in this way, but Muslims, thinkers, in the West and in the Muslim world have pontificated about this issue and provided very different approaches to how to resolve these accounts in the Quran and the account of human origins in Darwinian biology. So basically, there's kind of 4 broad approaches, and this is taken from actually Dr. Shoaib Malik as well, and he kind of has a useful category of categorization of Muslim thinkers on evolution. So one approach is that known as creationism. And according to these group of thinkers, that creation and the doctrine of creationism, or entails that everything is created directly by God, and it actually denies evolution, right? So when we say creationism here, that's what we're talking about. And when we're answering this question of creationism, right, if we take this position, if we answer this question, are non-humans, so non-human animals, a product of evolution? They would say no. So because it entails a denial of evolution, meaning that the evolutionary mechanisms, they're not convinced of them. So when we're asking this question, are we looking at non-human animals? Did they come about through the process of evolution? They would say no. But what about human beings? Did the human species come about through the process of evolution? They would say no as well. And then the question about is Adam a product or of evolution? They would also say no. So meaning that everything is created directly by God. Another group of thinkers held this doctrine of human exceptionalism. And what this entails is that everything comes about through evolution, and there's an exceptionalism, except for human beings. So in answer to this question, are non-human animals a product of evolution? They would say yes. Are humans a product of evolution? They would say no. And is Adam a product of evolution? They would say no. Similar to this, but there are differences, is this doctrine of Adamic exceptionalism. This holds that everything comes about through evolution, save Adam and Eve. All right. Now, this is important. What's the difference between Adamic exceptionalism and human exceptionalism is that human beings came about, the human species came about through evolutionary mechanisms, right? Through Darwinian, through natural selection, random mutation, and others. Yet, of human beings, only Adam and Eve are created directly by God, right? That's different because then human exceptionalism, which says all humans, right, are created by God, which includes Adam and Eve, but all humans as well. Here, it's all humans, just like every other living being, a living organism comes about through the not mechanisms of evolution. It's only Adam and Eve that are accepted, right? That's what's called Adamic exceptionalism. So you and I, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam, Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, all these prophets come about through evolution. It's only Sayyidina Adam and Sayyidina Hawa and Eve who have come about direct creation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then there's another group of Muslim thinkers, and they kind of hold this position of no exceptions. In other words, everything comes about through evolution, and so they would answer yes to non-human animals. They came about through evolution. Human beings came about through evolution, and Adam and Eve also came about through evolution. Right. So what I'm doing here is just giving you kind of the lay of the land, the landscape, right? And just presenting that this is what you would encounter when looking into this issue currently. And it's a good, just kind of a summary of the various positions on this. And like I said, I'm totally open to receiving questions during the presentation. So if there are questions, by all means ask. I'll just leave it to the moderator in the room to go ahead and manage that. So we'll move on unless there are other questions, but feel free to stop though. I welcome that actually. Okay, so like I said, we know these are kind of explanations of the positions of human exceptionalism, Adamic exceptionalism that I covered. And this is kind of how it would look like. So human exceptionalism is all from Dr. Shoaib too. They would say here, human exceptionalism is that when you look at this in the chart and how it looks, when other kind of this tree of life, and Dr. Shea mentioned if you just turn it 90 degrees, so this is kind of what we're looking at here. If you're looking at Homo erectus, the Homo neanderthals, right? And like there's a debate, are they even Homo sapiens or not? There's a very big debate on that, even currently. And we look at Homo sapiens. So within this, right, if we look at Homo sapiens, if we kind of go into that, what we're looking at is there's Homo erectus and then Homo neanderthals. And what we're looking at here is pre-Homo sapiens. So Homo sapiens are us, right? But pre-Homo sapiens are, you have, say, Adam alayhi salam, and then the Homo sapiens all come about through, they're all kind of accepted, from this evolutionary process here. And then, there's the issue of Adamic exceptionalism. I think is actually kind of switched, to be honest, there, yeah. But in Adamic exceptionalism, there's possible, this highlights possible time periods or relative, time periods when Sayyidina Adam would have theoretically appeared on this. Okay, so let's look at some of my own contributions here to this issue. And one of the important aspects that I felt was missing from the conversation of all the Muslim thinkers on this was looking at, this doctrine of ijma'. So it's especially this is a feature of Sunni orthodoxy, which is Sunni orthodoxy opposes doctrine of ijma', which means scholarly consensus. And if you look, inshallah, on the edited volume of this, you'll see more discussion on what the technical definition.
And,
Yes.
are you going to go through the scriptural text in the Sus?
Not for this presentation, no.
So that was part of the objectives to, I know you're going through the consensus scholar tradition, but part of what Shoaib was referencing, what they have in their booklets are those scriptural texts about what how do you understand the verse that talks about Bani Adam, what does it mean when Allah created him by his hand. So I would appreciate if you at least can go over those slides a little bit before you get the consensus, because we were
Okay, how much time do we have? I just wanted to truncate it just for the sake of time, because yesterday we weren't, because this was built for a 3-hour presentation and we only had 2, so that's why I just pivoted here.
I mean, you can. I'm simply just saying that we need to at least know the scriptural texts, and that was kind of part of the idea. They have those slide sets that we gave them. I know you can go to the consensus bit, but if they don't understand how to look at the verses of the Quran themselves, then they're missing learning objective, right? To not talk about that. So if you can,
Okay, I can definitely do that after I finish this kind of modified presentation, inshallah. Just let me know about the time,
Sure.
and we can keep going.
We can truncate the group activity after. That's fine, because there is a group activity, but I don't want them to not to be able to talk about the slide set that they have, which presents several verses.
Sure, yeah, I could definitely go over that, yeah. So now once I cover this, and then we can move on to those particular scriptural passages for some of the doctrines that we've mentioned here, yeah. So, very importantly, a part of, like especially what a particular feature of, Sunni approach to Islam, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, is this doctrine of ijma', this doctrine of consensus. So when there's scholarly consensus, and we don't mean, I added the term scholarly consensus because that's really the type of consensus that has authority. Just Muslims agreeing on something doesn't necessarily have that authority. But we're talking about, scholars who are considered mujtahids, who are able to conduct ijtihad. When they all agree on something, then that has a particular probative and force to it. And it also helps us navigate in how we interpret scripture as well. And so part of understanding of our deen, of our religion, and our not just our law and fiqh and other things, but also our theology is, we have to be highly cognizant of what doctrines have received consensus on. And basically, if you look from categories 1 through 4, those are all doctrines that enjoy some degree of consensus, and they fall into that category. Category 5 are areas where there's no scholarly consensus there. So is there a ijma'? Is there any such ijma' that relates to human beings? Well, there's actually quite a few, but for us, this idea here in our conversation is there a consensus that relates to who the first human is, or is there such a thing as a first human, right? And so one of the great collections there's a lot of books that reference ijma, and some of them are very, one has to know which ones are reliable, which ones are not. There's a whole process of that. But a work entitled Al-Iqna' fi Masal al-Ijma' by Ali ibn al-Qattan, 13th century scholar from Morocco or North Africa, and he documents a scholarly consensus. It's a very large work. And he says the following. He says that Muslims are in agreement that God the Exalted distinguished Adam alayhi salam from other prophets by creating him with his hand. So that's one way he distinguished him. Commanding the angels to prostrate to him. That's a second feature of distinguishment. And the third is, and making him the father of mankind, all of them, right? بأن خلقه بيده وأسجد له ملائكته وجعله أبا البشر كلهم. And so this is a very important point that Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam is the father of bashar, all human beings. So any organism which you apply the term bashar to, what's understood here is that it can only be applied if they are that organism, the father of that, lineage, is to Adam alayhi salam. And so anywhere in the Quran, anywhere in our Arabic language, and in our revealed text, you see the word bashar, it's understood that that Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam is the, father, and he's the first human then. Otherwise, then he wouldn't be the father of mankind. And the term bashar and insan are synonymous terms. So, and they have certain nuances, but for the most part, they are synonymous here. So this is an important point in which all scholars agree upon. Should this be taken into consideration when we're answering this question? And I would say yes, absolutely, there should be. And we have to keep this in mind. Ijma is an important source of our knowledge of religion, our practice and theological doctrines, and it also helps us navigate how we interpret the Quran and the Sunnah as well, but more importantly, the Quran. Without ijma, there will be a lot of pretty strange interpretations of the Quran. So, there's a couple of things to note here. One is that the term bashar, it has a determinative particle el, here, and this is a bit of Arabic language. I won't spend too much time on the technicalities here, but the idea is that it's referring not to just a specific group of humans, but is referring to all humans, right? The whole species. So Adam alayhi salam is the first human, meaning of the entire human species. And then Ibn al-Qattan ended his sentence with saying every one of them, kullihim. So this is an emphatic term, and it signifies each and every one of them. So it's not like there's some humans that are not related to Adam and others that are related to Adam, and then they kind of interbred and things like this. No, Adam alayhi salam is any human being, all of them go back to Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam. And then the third is the use of the term bashar, that it is a univocal term. And what this means here is that it's applied equally to every human, that is applied to every living thing that we call human. We mean they're equally human. It's not that some are less humans and than others, or some are more human than others. Every particular of the species is equally human, right? And so this is an important point of doctrine here. Why is this important? Well, keeping this in mind, let's kind of shift over to this idea of similarity here. And it'll help us understand how we can apply this. There's a Shafi'i scholar by Damiri in the 15th century, and he has an encyclopedia of animals, and a zoological encyclopedia. It's very interesting, 4 volumes. And he has an entry here on the al-qird, or the ape, or the monkey. It can be kind of translated in both ways. And he says some really interesting things regarding this in his biographical entry. And one of the things he mentions here is that the ape, monkey, he says it's a well-known animal. It's an animal, I'm translating it from the Arabic, is an animal that is ugly, it's witty, it's intelligent, it's quick to understand things, and can learn crafts. It's mentioned that a Nubian king gifted al-Mutawakkil a monkey which could sew, and another which could mold gold. The Yemenites would teach apes to take care of their things, of their needs, such that a butcher or a grocer would teach an ape to watch over their shop while the owner left. Probably went to go to sleep or have a good opinion and went to go pray, until the owner would return. They would also teach them how to steal, whereupon the ape would steal for them. So this is kind of his entry. He's documenting, how the role of a monkey in Muslim societies, certain Muslim societies, were. But he goes on and he says a very interesting thing here, and that's relevant to our conversation today when he's talking about al-kird, or the ape, monkey. And he says, وَهَذَا الْحَيْوَانُ شَبِيهٌ بِالْإِنسَانِ فِي غَالِبِ حَالَاتِهِ. He goes, this animal resembles humans in the majority of his qualities. Very interesting. So and he says apes, and what are those qualities? فَإِنَّهُ يَضْحَكُ, the apes laugh. وَيَطْرَبُ, they become joyous. وَيُقَعِ, they imitate. And وَيَحْكِي وَيَتَنَاوَلُ الشَّيْء بِيَدِهِ, they grasp objects with their hand. They have separated fingers up to their fingertips and nails. وله أصابع مفصلة إلى أنامل وأظافر. They can be trained, right? ويقبل التلقين والتعليم, and they can and taught to do things, right? And they find intimacy with humans. ويأنس بالناس, and he's listing all of these, right? ويمشي على الأربع. He lists all of these, and then he reaches this point after listing so many similarities between humans and apes, and he says, هو كالإنسان. He says the ape is virtually a human, right? And then he goes on to list a lot of other more similarities as well. And this is a very interesting passage. One is, Damiri is documenting, a number of similarities between apes and humans. And some of these deal with psychological ones, like laughing and becoming joyous. Others relate to, their type of physical, capabilities. They can grasp things. Others relate to their intellectual similarities, right? That they can be trained to do things. And others relate to more psychological, social similarities, that they find intimacy with human beings. So it's on various levels, morphological, psychological, social, that he identifies a number of similarities between apes and humans, and to the point where he says, وَهُوَ كَالْإِنسان, that the ape is virtually a human. And so what this indicates is that similarities between apes and humans, or between even other organisms, was something was quite well documented, not just in the Islamic civilization. One can look in the Greeks, the Romans. They find multiple passages in their literature, poetry, laws, philosophical works where they identify similarities between humans and apes. The Chinese, Japanese, Indians, the Africans. There's so many documentation of this phenomena. What's interesting is that they, to my knowledge at least, they never inferred, right? So this idea, there's data here, right? Similarity is a data. But from that data, they never inferred that humans and apes must have a common ancestor, or humans must evolve from apes, or apes must have evolved for humans. This idea doesn't seem to have been present, at that time. Well, why is this the case? And this is kind of the main question here that we have to consider as Muslims and Muslim scientists, right? Is that we're looking here, this idea of similarity. So similarity is pretty well documented. It's pretty well acknowledged. And it's not something that we should deny. And this includes things like, DNA similarity. This includes, where Muslim students hear this, that there's 98% similarity between humans and apes. And this kind of imposes this interpretation, that this inference from that data point, they conflate that, well, this must mean that they've had a common ancestor. Well, common ancestry is actually, and I think Darwinian biologists, philosophers of biology too, would acknowledge that's actually an inference. It's not what the data says. It's not like the data says this common ancestry, because no one actually has observed this. So it's not an empirical finding. It's rather an inference that made, and it is a logically possible inference. But this is really the heart of the debate here. How do we understand similarities? So similarity is not to be denied, but what's the cause of similarities? What's the explanation of similarity? And so here in the Darwinian framework, Elliot Sober, who's a philosopher of biology, he states that for most evolutionists, the similarities that different species share make it obvious that they have common ancestors. So for evolutionary and Darwinian framework, it's the most obvious inference one can make. And there's no reason to puzzle further over the question. So if you're in an evolutionary biology class, whether it's in high school, middle school, or in college, this question doesn't even arise. There's no reason to question it. Common ancestry is the answer to why we see similarities, not just with human and ape, but all living organisms. And that's a principle which the tree of life is designed, right? And like why organisms have a particular place on the tree of life, it's due to their similarities. and it's based off of different morphological DNA, different other features. Now, DNA is a major data point for that. So the kind of genealogical question that attracts far more attention in evolutionary biology concerns how various species are related to each other, not whether they are. So, it's almost a given that they are related. It's just a question of how are they related. That's kind of similarity. That's how similarity is understood in a Darwinian framework. Because you basically have two different possible, at least two, it could be more, logical explanations that either you see similarities and then you explain that due to common ancestry, or you can also explain similarities and the other logical possibilities that is due to separate ancestry, right? So if you take human tailbones, oh, monkeys also have tailbones. Well, the reason why they both have tailbones is due to a common ancestor. That's one explanation, and that's pretty much what is presented. That's what the Darwinian framework assumes, and it doesn't really question that. However, there's other logical inferences that one can make is that you have human tailbones and you have monkey tailbones, but they actually come from different organisms. They've inherited those, and that's the idea of separate ancestry. So really the question kind of here is, is this due to either common ancestry or separate ancestry? And this is a major debate now, right, between philosophers of biology and evolutionary biologists as well. Is that, how do we do this? And now Elliot Sober is one who he says you can't say for sure with any certainty which one it is. I mean, he himself inclined towards common ancestry, but then there are others who separate ancestry remains a logical possibility as well. You can't rule it out as well. And then others will say separate ancestry, but common ancestry does remain a possibility as well. So this is a very important phenomenon. How do we understand similarity? It's very important for us to keep in mind that's an inference, and there's a lot of metaphysical commitments that go into whichever position one adopts here, whether it's common ancestry or separate ancestry. Let's see here. So how do we understand similarity from like a Muslim theological perspective? This is quite a bit dense, but I'll go through it and you can read more inshallah in the future. But this idea of similarity or commonality in Arabic, the word that's used is ishtirak. And between two things, and we also say in Arabic that when they are similar things, they are similarities between many things. We'd say these things are one, in as much as it relates to the things shared, this idea of wahda, or this idea of unity. So there is a metaphysics that we informs what our particular theological perspective, and that's based off of what's called a substance accident distinction. And we also have an essentialist metaphysics. And based off of these two doctrines, the similarities are classified as either being related to the essence of a thing or they are accidental, right? So something like, just very briefly, something like eye color, it's considered classified as an accident to human beings. Height, weight, skin color, these are all accidents. They're not essential to being human, right? In this context here. Essential similarities can be when two things or more have the same species in common. For example, John and Fred, they are similar. We are similar. Why? Because we say we classify them as one, or that they have commonality due to both of them having the same essence, human, right? Because they're both human. So we say they are similar because they're both human, or we say they're both one. Commonality in essence is termed mumathala, and that's where two things are analogous due to a likeness. That they have a mumathala, they have similarity. So we can say two things are similar in height, two things are similar in, or it can be due to their genus. Now, the whole point here is that when we do see similar things, we explain similarities between either being due to them belonging in the same species or they're just accidents, right? So having brown eyes, frogs can have brown eyes, lizards can have brown eyes, and other things, they don't belong to the same species though. Essential similarity can also be when two things are congeneric or have the same genus in common, mujanasa. So we say here, like if we talk about horses, dogs, and humans, we do say there's commonality between them, but commonality at the level of that they have the same genus, and that genus is that they're all animals. When we look at accidental similarities, it's much more detail. So two things can be similar in quantity, such as two animals having the same height or same weight. They can be, this similarity is called musawa. Another type of similarity can be in quality, such as a horse, a dog, a human, they're all brown or they all have the same skin texture. This is known as mushabaha. Similarities can also be in relation, such as when you're comparing, you're talking about the relationship between the soul and the body. And many of our scholars say that it's analogous to the relationship of a king to a city. And this is called a nisba or munasaba, this type of similarity. Another similarity is when two things have a shape in common, such as drops of water and the earth having sphericity in common. This is called mushakala. And similarities can also be in points or edges, and this is called mutabaqa. And this is like, usually you find this in geometry. And then you can have similarities in position, right? Where different parts have the same position in relation to other parts of the body. And this is called muwaza or parallelism. So there's a whole typology of similarities here, right? Which we have to bring to the table when we're interpreting data, all right? Where do these similarities fall, and then what the cause of those similarities are. So can you, this is going to inform what position we take. Is it via common ancestry or is it via separate ancestry when we look at any similarities between living organisms? And this kind of gets to the heart of the picture, heart of the problem here, which is, on common ancestry, Sheikh Mustafa Sabri, who's a well-known Ash'ari theologian of the Ottoman Empire, he states that it is faulty logic to conclude that based solely on resemblance, tashabuh, right? So we see similarities. He says, based on that, in form between human body parts and any other animal, that the human species and apes are descended from a common ancestry. He said it's actually faulty logic. Although the difference between the humans and other living things is a difference resulting from a difference in essences and are not difference in degree. So when we see similarities and differences between human beings, it's because they actually have a different essence. They're actually a different species entirely. And it goes back to the essence of that living thing, why we see the properties that they do. It's not due to a common ancestor, why we see similarities or even differences here. And so this is a really nice exercise just to show that, when we hear things about similarities, sometimes Muslim educators, Muslim scientists, or theologians, they want to deny these similarities because they feel that similarity, the only option, the only inference one can make from similarities is that of common ancestry. However, there are multiple inferences one can make from similarities, right? So it need not worry us that humans and apes have 98%, DNA, similarities. That's not really an issue here. The issue here is, well, what inference can we make from that? Is it due to common ancestry? Is it due to separate ancestry? And that's a very contested issue as well. Yes, there are dominant positions in evolutionary biology, but those are also being contested as well. Okay, so I'll take some questions and then I can move to the slides that Dr. Awesome mentioned here. So while I move from that, we can take some questions if they are. How much time do I have also, Dr. Awesome, to go through those slides?
Looks like you have about 10 minutes maybe.
Yeah. So you want to take questions first, but you have 10 minutes for those slides and then you take questions after, which would be like.
I can take questions now and then we can go through those slides. I can take at least one question now.
Sure. Okay. Anybody got a question? Go ahead.
I can just project.
But he can't hear you.
Oh, okay. If it's incumbent upon Muslims to believe in evolution, then in the slide where you showed about creationism, human exceptionalism, Adamic exceptionalism, and no exceptions, does that mean that no exceptions, you were just using it as another reference point, or are there some Muslims that hold that view and you feel that that's faulty?
Could you repeat the question, the first part of the question?
Yeah, so when you're talking about the Muslim views on evolution being creationism, human exceptionalism, Adamic exceptionalism, and no exceptions, does that mean that the no exceptions category, you were just using it there as like a reference, or is that is that a commonly held view that you view as faulty based on category 2?
That's a good question. For me, that this classification that was presented is more of I'm just presenting it as a descriptive of what's out there, kind of giving the landscape. Which position is correct on there? I think, yeah, for me personally, definitely I find the Adamic exceptionalism position to be problematic, right? And especially in light of ijma, a lot of the scholarly consensus. There is a first human, and especially in light of the other doctrines that Sunni theologians held that humans were not created from prior living organisms, right? So that would render the position of Adamic exceptionalism very problematic, right? In that sense, this is my own opinion right now that I've consulted with many other mutakallimun scholars on this issue, senior scholars. Now, that doesn't mean human exceptionalism is the answer. Why? Because human exceptionalism, the way it's defined here, entails that you exclude humans, but you also affirm that evolutionary mechanisms are the way in which God creates. That to me is, there may be some evidence for that, but even amongst evolutionary biologists, natural selection and random mutations, are they the mechanisms for which evolution, based on which evolution works? That's very contested now. So for me, I don't see a reason why we have to commit ourselves, especially when scientists themselves are, contesting this issue. And we kind of let and see what, we can say the latest science is that, actually the latest science is that there's a large dissent regarding natural selection and random mutations as mechanisms for evolutionary change. And so right now, what are the mechanisms? It's not really well identified amongst evolutionary biologists. It's still being discussed. Natural selection random mutations were held as, very solid means by which evolution takes place. However, they're being those two mechanisms are being proven that they don't explain. They can't explain evolutionary change, and so they are looking for other explanations. So I don't see a reason why we should, if something's disputed in this realm, on what basis can we say God does create in this way, right? I think that's a major claim, and I think for now we just have to say, well, we know Allah Ta'ala creates, He explained to us in many verses of the Quran that He creates this through this way of khalq, right? And of direct creation. And so we affirm that based on the Quran, though, right? And that's, and that's how we interpret our reality and empirical evidence. If there are natural selection, random mutations, I don't think we can say with any sort of, in any conclusive way that this is indeed how God creates. And I think that's, so that's why even human exceptionalism to me is problematic, right, in that way. That's kind of where I stand on the issue, right? But definitely, like to hear from others, where they stand on this issue. Because amongst Christians, there is a position that's known as theistic evolution, right? And what it does is basically in this position, briefly, is they accept evolutionary accounts and they say, ooh, let's just accept them. But then we say that's what they do in theistic evolution is to say, well, this is how God creates things. It's through the Darwinian evolutionary mechanisms is how God creates. And the issue here is why I find it kind of problematic is to say, well, what happens is if evolutionary biologists discard that way and they adopt a new way? So now, to say God does create in a very definitive way in X, Y, and Z, well, the scientific community will now, what happens when they do discard X, Y, and Z, and they say, no, it's actually A, B, and C. And now are we going to say, oh, no, God now creates an A, B, and C, right? So it's a very, it puts religion and science in a very tentative relationship together. And for me, I would say, well, let the scientists figure things out and let's look at the epistemological strengths of their findings. And based on the epistemological strengths of their findings, we can say whether, God does or does not do something in a particular way, in light of, in light of the way scripture has been interpreted, right? And so that's why, we have to maintain that human beings come from, well, what I translated as dirt, but turab. Why? Because the Quran explicitly states that, and to deny that would be to denial of an explicit text in the Quran. So there are certain doctrines which we have to keep in mind as we find answers to this question. At this point in time, I'm not comfortable with theistic evolution, right? And I think human exceptionalism and even Adamic exceptionalism commit oneself to a theistic evolutionary perspective. And that's something that Christians have adopted, but many Christians are unhappy, even with theistic evolution. There's a lot of internal, debate, and where many Christians absolutely reject theistic evolutions. And on other grounds, one, they say because evolutionary biology maintains that their evolution is not goal directed. It's purposeless, right? And how can you say God does things in a purposeless, without any purpose, right? So there are other reasons why theistic evolution is not just empirical reasons, but also theological reasons why theistic evolution remains very problematic to me. So I don't commit myself to theistic evolution. What I do maintain is basically Allah Ta'ala creates as He explained in the Quran, and because we know that conclusively, and then that also Adam alayhi salam, there is a first human, and that first human, as communicated in the Quran, his name is Adam. He's the first male, there's a first female. They did not come from prior living forms in an evolutionary manner. And at the same time, Adam and Eve are not archetypes. They're not just like kind of psychological archetypes that help us make sense of our world and give meaning to life. No, they are actually real historical beings, right? I think those have to be maintained as Muslims, as Sunni Muslims, as we enter into this question here. Yeah. I hope I answered your question, inshallah.
Thank you.
Yeah, most welcome. All right.
So all of this proof text is what you had in this slides that you have, and so that's why I'm sort of saying these proof texts that he's mentioned, that Sheikh Omar is mentioning, are in the slide deck. So I just share with you those few verses, so you know the basis of that.
Yeah, so some of those proof texts that that we mentioned here is, we're going to kind of look at, these are the doctrines that I mentioned in summary form, but you'll find, that here in a bit more detail. One is this, we find three terms in the Quran that are used. Insan, we find the term bashar, and we find the term banu Adam. As we noted, we saw the term bashar being used in the ijma documentation of Ibn al-Qattan. And so the idea here is that insan and bashar, they both refer to mankind and apply equally to male and female, right? However, some scholars say that insan refers to our rational soul operating through its cognitive and active powers, and the term bashar refers to man considered in his bodily aspect. But they both are referring to human beings, just maybe different perspectives on the human being that they may emphasize. Because the word bashar means skin, right, in Arabic. And it means to be in contact, like physical contact. So that's why they say bashar refers to the more bodily aspects of a human being, and insan refers to the more cognitive aspects of a human being. And so, bashar is more like man, in as much as his biological nature we're talking about. So those are kind of some distinctions that have to be kept in mind as we continue this conversation. Another distinction is this idea of Banu Adam, right? What does Banu Adam mean? So Banu Adam refers to basically has three different applications in the Quran and the Hadith. One is Banu Adam refers to mankind, and Banu Adam in this reference, it includes Adam, it includes Hawa, it includes all male and female progeny. And Banu Adam in this sense is synonymous with the word An-Nas, because you see that in the Ya Ayyuhan Nas in the Quran, right? And so what does Nas refer to? And I mean, I'm providing this information because there are people who contest that. They say, oh, Banu Adam, it refers only to those progeny of Adam, and it doesn't refer to other human beings. And it shows the word Banu, it indicates it's a tribe, so there's a tribe of Adam, and then there's other humans who don't belong to his tribe. There are all these different conversations happening. And so I said, okay, let's actually kind of see what these are used in the Arabic language and in our scholarly tradition. Another sense of Banu Adam refers to solely the progeny of Adam and Hawa, and this usage includes all of mankind except for Adam and Hawa. So he's saying, this is just a lexical usage. And another sense, when you see Banu Adam in the Quran and Hadith, it does refer solely to the male progeny. And this is kind of what's considered a literal usage of the term Banu Adam. So you have these three important terms here. And many scholars have defined, you'll see this definition of a human being as a rational animal, the hayawanun natiq. Whoops. And what they mean here by hayawanun natiq is that hayawan basically means a living being, and natiq means a speaking being, right? And so the way we understand rational animal is a human is a living being that speaks. So speech is a very important aspect of being human. And you see this in the Quran, Surah Al-Rahman, Allah Ta'ala says, Allamahu khalaq al-insan, allamahu al-bayan. Right? Allah Ta'ala has taught us, right, bayan, which is this idea of discourse and speech, right? So that's a very important understanding of a feature of what it means to be human, as articulated in the Quran. And then there's different verses that talk about the creation of humans, right? So this idea, and there's a lot of verses that are provided here. الذي أحسن كل شيء خلقه وبدأ خلق الإنسان من طين. So this is something that we have to affirm as Muslims. Allah Ta'ala is clearly saying this in the Quran, that human beings are created from plain, this clay, as I translated here. And that comes up in many verses in the Quran too. Min tinin lazibin. And then another word is used as salsal, min hama'in masnoon, which is hardened clay. And then خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار, like hard blank of clay, like baked pottery, right? And then jinn kind, خلق الجان من مارج من نار, that they're created from pure flickering flame of fire. So there's different species are created have different material from which they're created from, and that's very clear in the Quran. Of course, Allah Ta'ala doesn't tell us every living thing and what they're created from, but He's telling us the most salient and perhaps ones that we should pay attention to. How old is the cosmos? This is a question, that when Dr. Shoaib talked about deep time. Is this concept of deep time a problem for Muslims? It doesn't seem to me it's an issue for Muslims. Although there's a difference of opinion, but most dominant understandings of the age of the cosmos is it can go in line perfectly well with this idea of deep time. Because in the Quran, definitely this idea, Inna rabbakum alladhi khalaqa as-samawati wal ard fi sittati ayyam. And so this word of 6 days, where God created the heavens and earth in 6 days, is mentioned. What do we understand by this word days, right? And this, actually from the time of the companions up until now, there's various different definitions of we know there's 6, but what does day refer to? There's different interpretations here, right? What does 6 days refer to in this verse? Sitati ayam. And then the key word here is yom, or ayam, the plural of it. So here, one understanding of yom is that it means, well, we understand from in Arabic, the word yom means the time period from dawn to dusk, right? And this is what a day means. And usually what it comes by when I say I'll meet you on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, in English, this idea of a time period from dawn to dusk. That's one meaning of the word day, al-yom. Another meaning, day in the Quran, is that it can refer to a time period of 1,000 years. And this is in the Quran, that a single day in your Lord's sight is as 1,000 years in yours, right? And then another verse it refers to a single day that would take 50,000 human years, right? So these are all Quranic usages of the word yom, right? And then a third use is in Arabic also means awqat. So Imam Baydawi, how he understands the verse that we just Sittati Ayam, he says that there's 6 time periods, right? Meaning they're not specified time periods of 12 hours, 24 hours, 1,000 years, but just 6 different stages, you could say, 6 different time periods. So, the word yom, when we say Sittati Ayam, the word Ayam here, how do we understand this? It could be understood in all of these 3 different ways. And so the idea of deep time, as Dr. Shoaib mentioned, doesn't really, I think, pose a problem for Muslims, and how we understand this. And so, because we don't know what those, if we take the word yom to mean time periods, we don't know exactly how long those time periods were. It's just that Allah Ta'ala has divided them into 6. And the length of those time periods, we don't know. And so deep time wouldn't seem to be conflicting with that understanding of the verse of the Quran. And these are all standard, very orthodox interpretations. You don't have to find like one solitary opinion in a manuscript written 1,000 years ago and make that the norm now. Another question is, were there living beings before the creation of human beings, right? So when Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran, with قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً, the main verse here that has received scholarly attention, قالوا, the angel said, أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ. Will you place thereon one who will work corruption there and shed blood? Right? Why has this received scholarly attention? Because how do they know? How do the angels know that this Khalifa will work corruption and shed blood? Do they have any foreknowledge? Some contemporary Muslims says, well, because they were prior humans and they were going off of their prior experience, angels' prior experience with humans and things like this. Well, how do they know? There's basically 2 classical opinions on this. One is that there are ulama say that God informed the angels that among the children of Adam, they are those who will work corruption and shed blood. It's just not mentioned in the verse. The verse doesn't mention every detail, right, of this conversation between Allah Ta'ala and the angels, just mentioning the salient points of the conversation. So many ulama said, well, Allah Ta'ala could easily have informed them, and there's nothing that states that didn't happen, but it's a possibility. And others is that they were previous inhabitants on the earth, not humans, but previous inhabitants. Who were they? They could have been the jinn kind, and based off of that creation of jinn kind, and they were corruption and bloodshed. So the angels were kind of using that as a point of reference and say, are they going to be like them and create, jinn kind and create corruption and bloodshed? So what this means is that were they living beings? Before the creation of humans? The answer is yes, right? They just weren't humans, though, but there were other living beings prior to the creation of human beings, though. Now we go to the question of what's man's place in the cosmos, and this idea, this very important verse is that وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ وَحَمَلْنَاهُمْ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ. So verily, we have loftily honored the offsprings of Adam, right? Bani Adam. And, so this idea of karamna, so human beings are an honored species. And how are they honored? Well, the ulama have discussed many ways, and you look in the commentaries on this verse and other verses, there's multiple reflections on how human beings have been honored by Allah Ta'ala, in addition to the ones explicitly mentioned in this verse. But here, وَفَضَّلْنَاهُمْ عَلَى كَثِيرٍ مِمَّا خَلَقْنَا تَفْضِيلًا. And we have favored them over a multitude of those we have created, beyond telling. So this verse here, it shows where's the place of human beings in the cosmos. And that's why the ulama have interpreted this to say, concluded, that humans are the most superior and honorable of all of God's creation, right? And of course, the Prophet ﷺ is the most honored of all humans and all of creation as well. When we get to who is the father of mankind, like I said, we talked about this. There's a hadith in Sahih Muslim where, that explicitly state, and other hadith that this is a hadith of the Shafa'ah, a hadith of intercession, and all human beings, the first person they'll go to is Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, and all human beings, right, will go to, and they'll say, the hadith mentioned that then people will come to Adam and say, you are the father of mankind, Abul Bashar. Allah created you with his own 2 hands and breathed into you his spirit. So the father of mankind, meaning the first human, is an idiomatic expression, is Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam, due to the doctrinal, the ijma, the scholarly consensus, but then also to these other proof texts as well. And then who was the first human being based off of this? We said was Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam. I will create. And so the word here is, idea of khalq. Now keep in mind the word khalq means to create from non-existence to existence, right? To bring something from non-existence to existence. And Allah Ta'ala, and so they are materials which Allah Ta'ala used to create human beings, min tlin. So I will create a man, bashar, from clay, but it's not from another human being, right? That's not stated here. So the idea of creation, it can be from no materials, which is this doctrine of creation ex nihilo, or it can be creating from other prior materials as well, in this case, clay. Another verse here, so Prophet Adam alayhi salam is the first human being by all these verses of the Quran and by the scholarly consensus, which guides us on how to interpret these verses of the Quran. So what about any doctrines regarding Hawa alayhi salam? Very interesting stories and reports in the Tafsir of al-Tabari. He mentions the following report, and he says that then Iblis was exiled from the garden when he was, because the name Hawa is not mentioned in the Quran anywhere, right? And so, but Allah Ta'ala does say, Uskun anta wa zawjuk, right? You and your wife, your companion, your wife, reside in paradise. So her name is not mentioned in the Quran. Her name is mentioned in Hadith, actually, which clarifies how we understand the verses in the Quran. So here, this idea, this report that Imam Tabari provides to us in this great tafsir of the Quran, and he says that Adam was put to dwell in the garden. He went around alone with no wife, in whom he can find repose. Then he fell asleep and woke up, it should be, to find a woman sitting beside his head, whom God had created from his rib. So he asked her, "Who are you?" And she said, "A woman." And he said, "Why are you created?" She said, "So that you can find repose in me." Then the angels asked him to see how much he knew. "What is her name, Adam?" He said, "Hawa." They said, "Why is she called Hawa?" He said, "Because she was created from something living, hay, meaning is from his rib." Then God said to him, "Adam, dwell you and your wife." So this is a verse in the Quran. Uskun anta wa zawjuk, in the garden, and eat thereof easefully where you desire. And so this is kind of one of the main reports that give us some indication of the creation of Hawa and the context in which she was brought into existence. So the question here, like we mentioned before, did humans evolve from prior living beings? Did the human form evolve? And we talked about these doctrines as well. So there's many verses of the Quran that support this doctrine that human beings did not evolve from prior living beings, and the human form itself did not evolve. The verse in the Quran, الَّذِي خَلَقَكَ فَسَوَّاكَ فَعَدَلَكَ, we created you, then formed you perfect. فَسَوَّاكَ, right, is forming. فَعَدَلَكَ, then balanced you even out, right? So the form is being described as something that's very balanced, the human form. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, that we've created man in the fairest symmetry, the taqweem. And then, so human beings are created from the outset, right? And that's the key thing, from the very first human in the complete physical form and the fairest symmetrical form. Human beings did not evolve over the course of time from another species, and humans are a living being distinct in essence, not in terms of degree, right, from other living things. And this is where this last part creates a lot of tension with the Darwinian understanding of human beings here. And then there's a question of where Prophet Adam and Hawa were created. And there's a dispute amongst our scholars here on this. Okay, I think, yeah, that's pretty much summing up all of the doctrines that we went through and then the scriptural proofs for that. How are you doing on time, Dr. Rothman? Are we okay?
We're out of time, But Jazakallah khair, I wanted to at least see that you go through the slides that we have provided to them. There is, take some questions, inshallah. Those who are done, you can get your food. The food is here. It's been here for 20
I can
minutes.
take questions too. I can stay on.
You can take questions here, so inshallah. So whoever wants to stay for questions, fine. What else? Keep it.
Before you leave, we are going to be rearranging the room. So all your belongings need to move, so that they're not in the way when we, switch the tables around. When you come back from lunch, rooms will look different for the next, segment. If a few of you would like to stay back and help rearrange tables too, that would be awesome, because that would be quicker, and then everyone else can, then we can all eat together faster. Gentlemen, if you'd like to stay, not because of strength or anything, but for the chivalry, that would be great.
Well, okay, so if there's a question we can ask, Sheikh Omar, go ahead.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you can hear me, but
I can hear you. Yeah.
to a few verses in the Quran that anytime the word qirada, which is monkeys in the Quran, was mentioned only 3 times in the Holy Quran. And wherever it was mentioned in the verses of Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Al-Ma'idah and Surah Al-A'raf were referred to as punishment. For instance, the people of Sabbath, when they disobeyed the order of Allah, their punishment was to transform it into qirada. So it's not logical for a Muslim believer to think about the Darwin theory as appreciated. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have evolved us from that species, why would he punish us by mentioning it as punishment in the Quran?
So if I understand your question, you're saying that your understanding is, and I think it's a correct understanding, that that there are certain human beings and individual groups who were transformed into monkeys, right? As mentioned in the Quran, right?
Only in the form of punishment.
Yeah, and the context is that was done as a punishment, yeah.
Or disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Correct.
It doesn't make sense that he would mention qirada as punishment or transforming them into qirada as punishment if this is where he created them.
I see what you're saying, yeah. Okay, yeah, I mean, I think I would agree. I think that's what our Muslim scholars and Mufassirun would say too. It is definitely that transformation that took place was a form of punishment. The question that our scholars get into is that did they actually, what was changed, right? Because if it's a form of punishment, if they were changed from humans to monkeys, like their actual essence, is that really a punishment? Because a monkey doesn't really think that they're lower, right? So what they did say is that it was actually a transformation of their physical form, and it was a real transformation. But it was a real transformation of their physical form, or their essence of human was still there. But just some of their morphological, qualities were changed to that of an ape, and as a punishment, exactly. That would go in line with this understanding that was done as a punishment for their behaviors and beliefs. Yeah.
Okay, I think we need to move on. So Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Omar, for
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you for everybody.
Wishing you all the best. So.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Bismillah, salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sallam. MashaAllah, look. The Alhamdulillah students are here. They're gracing us with their presence now. The MashaAllah students have been here. So we're going to start, but I just wanna, before we start, I wanna mention a couple of things. So tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to have a seminar in the morning. Then after that seminar, after that seminar is a review seminar about epistemic sort of framework, which Sheikh Omar taught you yesterday. So the last seminar is a little variable in time, but the idea is to crystallize all your learning into a single sheet, basically, that you'll go through tomorrow afternoon. So I'm saying all this because tomorrow I might make an appearance, but I will not be here. Have to leave early, so I might not be here tomorrow. But inshallah, Dr. Rola will be doing the epistemic framework at the end, inshallah. And Dr. Yusuf will introduce again, and Dr. Hashi from Malaysia will join us in the morning. So don't skip out and say, hey, Monday is not important. Monday is when you crystallize all your learning in the end. The other thing I want to mention is that we've been holding back for you the gift bags that Triple IT has graciously put together for each of your students. So again, there's another reason to stay. Inshallah, within that, you already got some pens, but there's a couple of books in there. One of them which I signed for you. There is a Tumblr. So they've been graciously hosting you, but also they prepared gifts for you out of the kindness of their hearts. So please don't leave before you get those gifts. We held it back because we want to hold something back for you because you have to do the surveys tomorrow. You might remember before you leave. So you can't get that stuff until the survey is done. But I won't be here as the PI. So what happens is Dr. Rhoda's responsibility at that point. So those are housekeepings for tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala. Lastly, you might have seen these 3 books. I'll just tell you what they are, and you'll say they're very expensive. I'll say, yeah, that's what the publishers do because people don't care about copyrights and they send PDFs everywhere around the world. So they jack up the prices. But in any case, we're in the Capitalist Society. This is the IAM stock, the initial Islam medicine stock. So this is these are all edited volumes. This one is on Organization Islam. It actually has, what's important from my perspective, is it has a fatwa that took 10 years to research by Mufti Zubair Butt. So you'll actually read an entire fatwa on all the dimensions that he went through, right? So he didn't write it. It's reproduced in this book and part of the appendix. But you will get the sense. We say, oh, we have a fatwa online. It's like 3 paragraphs. This was like this is not 3 paragraphs. It's quite large. We understand the discourse of actually a mufti who was trying to think about the issue in a different way. So anyway, that's there. There's Islam and biomedicine. So actually, let me start here. Everybody wants to talk about fiqh. So this is medicine sharia. This is the first book I kind of put together on Islamic bioethics. It's more discursive. So it's kind of like helping you think about how you should engage the discourse of Islamic bioethics, which I've already said is not fiqh of medicine. It involves many different stakeholders. So it sets up the framework of how to read the literature. And because everyone wants to talk about fiqh, this book, Islam Biomedicine, moves to like 10,000 feet above that, thinking about the 2 domains of knowledge as you've heard today, right? So how do we theologically engage with these questions of health, disease, and all those sorts of things from an Islamic perspective? So in any case, they're here. I'm going to leave. If you would like to purchase them, you can purchase them. I'm saying that because they have to go with me to Indonesia tomorrow. So they will not be here tomorrow. But you can pay for them through the Square thing or whatever. And so inshallah ta'ala, we can arrange that and I can sign these for you, but I need to pack them. So I wanted to tell you what they are. And as I said, this is IAM stock. I don't get anything out of this, but it's a donation for the initial Islam medicine. We bought these for those sort of events that we've had. So khalas, that's all I wanted to say. I'll now introduce Dr. Yusuf, who is here with us, inshallah, from all the way from Malaysia. I shared with you that he also has an intersectional interest in this domain. So he's an assistant professor at the International Islamic University in Malaysia. He spends a lot of his time teaching anatomy, and more recently, he is the head, I don't know what the term is, but of the debate team at IIM that has won international awards, mashallah. So you will see you'll have to debate on your tables. So he actually does this for a living as well. And then, as mentioned, he has a postgrad degree in Islamic studies as well. So Dr. Yusuf will do, and this is all activities. He'll explain to you what's going on. Tomorrow you'll have a lecture. So Dr. Yusuf, barakallahu feek.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So how are you today? Are you refreshed? Some of you went through walking just now, right? So you're refreshing your mind, inshallah. Okay, I'm not going to introduce much myself. I'm from 9,000 miles from here. 9,000 miles. I checked this now. Alhamdulillah. Okay, 19,500 kilometers to be exact, to Kuantan, my place. Alhamdulillah. And I'll be here with all of you. Some of you got quite confused. They thought I'm like the participants, and they're seeing me doing some jobs. Alhamdulillah. And I'm very happy to be with all of you here to share the stage with the students, with the medical professionals, with all of the people from IIT. It was a really pleasure for me. And for today's session, inshallah, much more to be said tomorrow. Inshallah, one of the good sessions is tomorrow. and today is good as well. And today is going to be very easy. If you see the case study in front of you, is very easy, and it's not going to, but you need some thinking, conceptual thinking. It's not like very clinical case. It's like very simple case, but the idea behind that is very important. I'm just relate to you some stories. For example, anyone knows Netherlands, or this is the first time? You know Netherlands?
Oh no, this is my first time.
Oh, okay. First time seeing Alhamdulillah. Okay. Then, in 2018, he published a book by the name of Human Errors, a panorama of our glitches from pointless bones to broken genes. When he published his book, actually this book is not something that new. It was just rephrasing all of the arguments, all of the things mentioned by evolutionists. For example, you know Richard Dawkins, right? Richard Dawkins is quite famous. He did mention something, especially when he talked about the topic from the first topic. He did mention something very bad. He was saying that if the engineer is there, then the engineer was not a good engineer. Some others evolutionists mentioned that it was a stupid design. Na'uzubillah. Na'uzubillah, okay? And then, in my own institution, we have students who are losing faith just because it does not make sense when they try to see the anatomical structures or the physiological functions. They will say that how can the ultimate intelligent God create all of this stuff? So your specific case, all these cases are unique, and I will mention that later on. Why is it unique? Because I want to see how you discuss. Right? So there are 3 cases, inshallah, in each group. We can see the first one is the backward retina designed, which is this group. Then you have the second group, the vitamin C deficiency, which is very simple group. Very simple issue, we know already. You need to take from the oranges and etc. And the third thing is that appendix, which you can remove using the surgery. It's very simple. All of us know. Some of us got pain and go and remove it. So the thing is, what is the idea behind it? So in each group, in each case, you have 2 dimensions, right? For example, you have the Islamic group. I'm not saying you're non-Muslims, okay? The Islamic group and the science group. Here, Islamic group, the science group. Islamic group, science group, okay? So with a span of 30 minutes, what you're going to do, you are going to answer few questions in your discussion, because we can discuss so many things. Right? Number 1, you need to discuss what are issues on hand. At the hand, what's the issues talking? What's the issues? Right? What's the issue? For example, you're talking about Islamic issue. What is the Islamic issues pertaining to that case? What is the science issue? Talk about science, it can be ethics, it can be biomedical perspective, but I'm not really focusing on clinical part. Right? It is much more fundamentals which can be applied to all. Right? So you are going to discuss in your groups about 30 minutes, and there's a paper that you can come up with a mind map. So you can refer to any references, discuss, try to understand why is it the claim, for example, the scientific claims. Why? And relate with the concept you learned earlier about evolution, transhumanism, and try to see whether the evidence is concrete or not, or it can be disputed. Right? That is the science part. Similarly to the Islamic view. Because we have 3 groups here, I want to see whether you are having similar line of thinking, or you might have extra thinking, right? And how you going to consider it. And the third thing is that you must define what is considered as a wrong design, what is considered as non-function design, which is something that I'm going to elaborate further during our discussion. So after 30 minutes, what we're going to do is that you can appoint 1 person in your group, is fine, or you can both together can speak. We're going to, we might arrange the chairs so that we can face each other. And what happened is that, and before I forget, each groups, after you prepare the 30 minutes, prepare some questions to be asked to the other group. Okay, for example, in this group, the retina group, you have the science base, you have some theological questions, Islamic question, keep it, ask them, right? So after you presented, you're also going to ask them, right? We open up like few minutes, 1 or 2 questions. You can ask them, either you want to ask more clarification, you disagree, is fine. The only thing is that please do it in the most, what we call it, epistemic humility. Yeah. I hope no chair has been thrown. Alhamdulillah, right? We do it, alhamdulillah, in a more mature manner and etc. And we can discuss it. It's okay to disagree with each other. I'm not, because this is a session that even I myself going to learn from all of you. Right? So you're going to present, then you open the questions for the other groups, and other groups can even comment or even give your own opinion on that. Okay, I'm going to be here, inshallah, if I want to ask anything. Then what you have on the table, you have the case study, you have the A3 paper for you to help you in your presentation. So you have some certain points you want to discuss. And yeah, that's all. Before we start, any questions to ask? Yes.
To clarify, this side of the room, Islamic perspective?
Yes, but you are focusing more on addressing your case, right?
Right.
Yeah, so you're not really bothering about other groups, but of course, we're going to see some redundancy, especially the Islamic perspective. But the case itself is a bit different, tuned in different ways. So I'm not going to mention it now, no surprise, right? So the thing is, yeah, then if you, let's say you presented something and you see the other groups, Islamic sees that you also have the same point, you can elaborate it in a different way. That's fine, inshallah. Okay. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah, they just talk about science. Yes, on the same topic. So both of you have the same topic, but the question, okay, now pertaining to the questions. The questions are, it's a guiding questions, right? Not necessarily you need to stick to it, because some of the questions been discussed earlier about transhumanism. You can use that questions to guide you, but you even can create your own questions and your own dimensions to discuss. That is fine, right? I'm just telling you, these three cases are few of the cases mentioned in the book. In the book, it mentions so many things about pointless bones, about back pain, about knee pain, about the maxillary sinus, upward drainage, about the long recurrent laryngeal nerve, a lot of issues. But inshallah, the concept of it is between in these three cases, inshallah. Okay, any questions? No, inshallah, you can start to discuss. Alhamdulillah. Okay, now we come to the session of discussion among us, inshallah. There are a few rules. Let us allow them to assist. Sure.
Everyone has to, on this side has to be sitting on the side.
Yeah, sure. So we can see all our beautiful faces. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, very
Very tiring. Okay, we're going to start one by one. To save time, I'm not going to read the case because you are well versed of the case. You can see the case in front. The basic idea of this first case is to give us the impression that our eye design is flawed. Right? The basic idea is that to tell us, they will explain to us, the scientific group will explain to us why is it considered as flawed, etc. We'll give them a chance. So the idea is that, and this is very important because it shows that it seems to suggest when it's an error, means that how can God, which is Alim, knows everything and etc., omniscience and etc., create something that considered as error. So the first part is that let us allow the science part to present first, or the Islamic part. Which ones have confidence to start first? Okay, good, mashallah, they are very good. Yeah. So yes, tell us about 5 minutes. What's your view in your group? Yes.
So we kind of broke it down between, and for visual, obviously it's up there. So when we're taking a look at the difference between the cephalopod eye and the vertebrate eye, it's important to note that we're talking about, so in the cephalopod, it's everted, meaning that the photoreceptors are on the outermost portion, compared to the vertebrate eye where they're turned inward. And so when we're talking about the flaw, we're talking about this inward turning. So when you look at the eye, the light comes through the lens and it goes towards the photoreceptors, and that's what brings it down into our brain. And so when we look at the design, this necessarily creates a blind spot because there has to be that bending over the photoreceptors inward. And so those areas where there are no photoreceptors is why we have a blind spot. So in this scenario, that's why this is classified as a flaw. And so when we were looking into this, we were thinking about what is the difference between the environment of these two animals, I guess, and what these two beings might necessarily need. And so when we talk about evolution, we talk about the scientific perspective on why these eyes exist. They have to be, they don't just exist within a diagram like this. They don't just exist within a to B comparison. They also have to exist within their environment. They have to live through their separate lives. And so when we look at the cephalopod underwater, squids, for example, the amount of water that penetrates through water is a lot lower than the amount of light that travels through, the amount of light that travels through water is not as much light as travels through the air. And so you necessarily need an eye where the photoreceptors are facing outwards and they're more easily able to get the light that comes through the lens. Compared to an invertebrate eye, when we think about how much light is available for us on the surface, the amount of light that goes through is a lot more. And so this is a little bit of a protective measure to allow that light to go through the photoreceptors in the back. And
Okay, before that, to make it easy to understand, so the photoreceptors for the vertebral eye is located at the back, is it?
yeah,
So which means the light needs to travel all up to the back of
To the back.
photoreceptors, transduce, and goes back to the optic nerve and the visual pathway, right?
yeah,
For the cephalopods, which is for the octopus. Octopus, the photoreceptors direct hit to the light, right?
yeah.
Okay. Then, yeah, you have anything to share first, yes, before we ask questions.
And so another thing that we found is that within these animals that are on land, so when we're looking at a lot of the vertebrae, they have to deal with the problem of having space saving within their eyes. And so we found that within cephalopod eyes, the orientation means that more space is taken up by a lot of the neurons compared to in the vertebrae eyes on land. And so because it's a more space efficient design, you're able to have smaller eyes, but in a sense have more of those eyes available to transmit signals to the brain. And so you're able to develop heads where less of the space is taken over by the eye. So when you look at the human eye, for example, what percent does that take up of the head compared to something that's underwater that might take up that I might necessarily need to be big to have as much optical capacity.
Okay, anything else?
I think it's just more towards reinforcing those points, especially considering for vertebrates, where being more like highly visual and much more like need to have like higher spatial resolutions and which need to process and integrate a lot more in need to use a lot more complex circuitry. Efficiency can like really matter in those cases. So yeah, so maybe incident but not a bug though. So contextual into environment is kind of the big part. And that was kind of at least for the second question in terms of flawed. No, and that depends on like I guess for us we think it's no because it just doesn't make a fair comparison to say that the cephalopod is better than the vertebrates organization of like the retina just because of that one metric of the retina is just more sensitive. There's other parts to consider depending on what's more important. And underwater, there's certain things that are more important, so you give a lot more weight to the sensitivity to light. But on land, there's other things that matter more, and actually we may be better. So, flawed, no. The next question was in terms of, is it feasible to enhance human vision by using technology to reverse or bypass the retinal inversion, either through bionic eye or prosthetic interventions? I guess we kind of caught that this question because even, well, this seems more like an engineering question. So from a scientist, like the best like we would approach it is, even if it is feasible, however the engineers would want to solve that problem, it wouldn't be best recommended because there's like there's a trade-off to it, and we can at least simulate or like predict how not better off we would be if we had it this way. like, it's hard to see if like where the net benefit would be. You may get that benefit in terms of light coming in, but you may actually get more damage just because, you know, you have more UV and more light incoming, and it may damage the vessel and some structures there. So those are answers. So
Okay,
the engineers can answer if it's feasible.
So the idea is that not necessarily you need to change it because it's not a flaw at all, according to you, right?
Yeah, it's not flawed, so no need to change it. And I guess like the other part, like when we came to this is if you it comes easy like when we first discover like the structure of this, we'd be like, oh, we can easily see like this huge difference of like this function, like one is more sensitive than the other. And then now we have this assumption saying it was flawed, and then you have these arguments made to it. But then as you ask more questions or as more technology develops and we can study it out and stuff, we find out like the assumptions have been wrong and we just see it differently. So that's just like an added thing. Just one thing I noticed when I was reading on this. Like,
Good, mashallah. Okay, any questions coming from the theological group? Yes.
I have one. My question was your explanation about how like fish and creatures that live underwater get less light, and that's why the photoreceptors are on the outside. Is that like a theory that you guys came up with, or is that like supported by scientific studies or generally the consensus in like the marine biology?
Just give me a couple papers that like said that was kind of a big thing, especially because you don't have to tend with UV as much coming off of the surface of the water, but you still need to be able to get all that light into your eye.
You agree with that? You agree with that answer?
Well, the thing is, like, our group also said that the eye's blind spot is not a flaw, so I don't.
Okay.
We
so
agree.
yeah. Okay, any other from other groups? You want to ask any questions to this group? Yes, so you want to ask something? Sure.
So the perspective on it being a flaw is just the existence of the blind spot, and looking at it, it doesn't look correct from from a naive human perspective. So when we look at it, we see that bending over, it doesn't look correct. Like it makes more sense logically for us to be, oh, it's an A to B pathway, it goes straight through. What is the bending, and why does it create an optic nerve issue with a blind spot?
You see differences, right? But you
Yeah. And if you're not a physiologist,
Yeah.
or you're not an optical engineer or anything like that, unless you have some kind of experience, you'll look at this and you'll say there's some kind of bending. And so when we talk about it being a flaw, you say, oh, there's a blind spot, then there must be a problem.
Okay.
And it looks kind of funny, so it must not work correctly. And so when people might propose this as a flaw, that's kind of the perspective they're coming from. It doesn't look like it works intuitively, but again, we talk about this in practice in a real scenario, not just looking at the structure and saying this structure looks different from this structure and why does it not look like it makes sense? But within the context of the real world, it makes more sense this way for us.
Oh, good, mashallah. Any other questions from other groups? You want to add anything or you want to ask anything for clarification? Yes.
So, we're also arguing like from a science viewpoint, but couldn't it also be that like we have two eyes, that's why we don't know our blind spot, right? Because it's different. So evolutionarily, would this then be making us more dependent on having two eyes in order to not have this blind spot affect us so that it could still be a net benefit? Would you say that if someone for some reason does not have one eye, like maybe they would then be at a disadvantage because now they don't have that compensatory mechanism? Like, what are your thoughts? I know that was really a question, but.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to if when we said like it's not flawed, that's the trade-off. Yeah, so this huge benefit that comes with like us being able to process things in a much more efficient way comes a trade-off of like you need both eyes. So yeah.
Okay.
Real quick, it's another thing is that like predators and prey have different eye orientations. Like prey tend to have eyes on their side so that they can watch out for predators, and then predators tend to have eyes towards the front so that they're able to like zone more in on whatever they're hunting for. And so our perspective is having eyes in the front of our head. And so If we did have eyes on the sides of our head, then that blind spot would matter a lot more because the blind spot is larger because you have blind spots on both sides rather than being overlapping. And so it's one of those things where like if you were a gazelle, for example, like it might matter more to you, but because our perspective is one of where our eyes are on the front, then it also doesn't make as much of a difference like evolutionarily. But like a cephalopod is like they might have eyes on the opposite side of their head. And so for them, not having that blind spot makes more of a difference for them.
Okay. Just to add up a few things. For example, Octopus vulgaris, one of the species of the cephalopods, they cannot live more than 20 minutes on the land. So if you ask them to be with us, join us for discussion, they might be dead. No, you are here for 1 hour and a half, right? So it seems that the way we understood in terms of science, there are differences, but they are adapted to their own environment and functions, right? So we don't say it's a flaw. It's a difference of function, but certain functions might be complicated and you have the compensatory mechanism for it. And even the eagles, which have a visual acuity very good, having this kind of inverted retina. Plus, we need to consider other structures involved. For example, the blood vessels. In these eye structures, the blood vessels, especially the one who nourish the choroid part, is at the back. Because if you put it in front and hit the light directly, it might cause it to become very heated and the photoreceptor is going to die easily. But for the octopus, it's not meant to be long compared to us. So it seems that if you do more studies, it makes sense, especially the part where you mentioned about the safe to utilize all of the space. Ours are better compared to the octopus. So it's subjective depending to the environment they are living in. Okay, that's good, inshallah. Now let us listen to our Maulanas. Inshallah. What do you want to mention about Islamic perspective here?
So I guess we can kind of each say one of the points. We have a few different points here about the eyes blind spots. So I'll start with the fact that there's an ayah in the Quran that Allah says that there's signs everywhere, and He says with the anfusikum in yourselves as well. And someone already mentioned this, but it brings us back to the idea that we didn't even know there were blind spots in our eyes until we eventually got like the technology to look in our eyes, or at least until the first person did the experiment where you can like draw a blind spot on a paper and you move your eye around and you can find your own blind spot that way. And so the fact that we didn't even know there was a blind spot and then we came to discover it, that we believe is symbolically encouraging self-investigation, self-discovery, because Allah tells us to explore the signs of ourselves, and it makes you wonder what else there is out there in ourselves that we don't know about, and that there can be hidden wisdoms for. And furthermore, it also shows the fact that the two eyes work in conjunction and are reliant upon one another to fill in the blind spot. If you didn't have your other eye, your blind spot would be more noticeable. And there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says, Allah is not unknown to you. Indeed, Allah is not one-eyed, but the false Messiah, the Masih Dajjal, is one-eyed and cannot see outside of his right eye. So this also points to this more symbolic notion of having one eye being making you blind to something. It means that like, and quite literally numerically, you don't have as many perspectives as you would if you had another eye. And what one eye lacks, the other eye fills in. And that's also representative of the fact that revelation is filling in things for us that we cannot fill in with our own senses, because our own senses are inherently limited. And so that humbles us before Allah. It shows us that this notion of ahsanu taqweem, best form, can be understood to mean best form in however Allah wills it, not best form in that we are so magnificent, we're independent of Allah. That is, the only person who can be truly independent is a creator, not a creation. So the fact that we are dependent on our occipital lobes filling in information on the other eye, scanning a different part and sending that information to fill in the blind spot, these are things that are given to us by our creator, and it further humbles us before him and shows how we are dependent on him.
Inshallah. Good point. Dependency. Okay. Yes. Any additional from you?
I think the other thing that we kind of had to add was, let's take, for example, if it is a flaw, right? As you had brought up before, right? Even if it is a flaw, then as Muslims, we should perceive it as a test, right? Even if we have this blind spot and this blind spot made an effect on how we actually saw day to day, we should take this as a test, and how we adapt to it is showing how faithful we are and how we react to these things. So there was also a hadith, if Allah wills good for someone, he afflicts him with trials, and that's in Bukhari. So even if we are afflicted with something, if this blind spot made a very large difference in our day-to-day, how we react to that is a testament to how strong we believe.
Yes.
Do you want to cover it?
Yeah, I think cover.
The question is, from an Islamic ethical perspective, is it permissible to use technology to enhance human vision beyond its natural limits? We cited some of what we discussed before. It's just beyond its natural limits, we would not recommend, and we don't that notion. Basically based on the fact that we're supposed to perceive the world as Allah intended, and we don't necessarily understand the complexity of Allah's creation, even if it is us, we study our own cells, our own brain, the brain, studying the brain, right? We don't understand the complexity of the optic nerve to these different relay points into the occipital lobe, into the frontal cortex and stuff like that. And in enhancing something, are we inevitably leading to more anxiety or more this and that? Like, we know that that if you cannot sleep, some people have the disorder, they cannot sleep, right? And so that has consequences. That's like a disorder. If you enhance your vision, are you inevitably introducing something that's actually we have no clue about? So from not only the scientific, but from the Islamic ethical perspective, we're altering how the world is supposed to be perceived, and it might take us away from how we're supposed to worship Allah, because Allah intended us to worship Him in the Quran, and He gave us the faculties to worship Allah, to recognize His sign. We don't need to go beyond those.
Okay, good, mashallah. Any questions from that? Coming from the science field. Anything you want to ask, clarification, or perspective?
So, as a scientist, I guess I'm not compelled by that reasoning, and I think it's because just because we don't know, it doesn't seem like something like not to do, because again, this could be exploratory. Like you said, like if you had shown me, like, I guess empirical, or even just something like conceptually of how this could actually worsen things, then I can understand that. But I guess I'm confused of, just because we don't know it, why not? And also, the only difference right here that would change our experience is that we would not have like a blind spot, and we can just have more light coming in. So in what way would our experience change enough for you to be like, we shouldn't?
Okay, there's a comment or question?
Sorry, that was comment, but then to a question, which is like, well, what part of the human experience do you think like would change from this? Because what would happen with this enhancement is just that you would just basically, you just have more, not have a blind spot, or just more light coming in, like,
You got the question?
I guess I'll try, first. Let's see. Yeah, so predictive reasoning, right? Our brain has the capacity to predict certain things, like when we're reading, we're able to predict the word without actually reading the whole thing. And if we start changing the normative way of processing things, let's say we're adding more information into the mix, where our machine learning algorithm was not developed on this, right? Our brain has physical tendencies and stuff like that. So we don't know how that computation might affect our perception of reality, right? So it's from
So things that when we do not know, so we shouldn't go.
So we do
not
not
know what could happen, maybe mafsada or maslah.
Yeah.
Right? If there's no maslaha, if there's nothing necessity,
there's no necessity.
no necessity for that. So should you go or do not go, because you don't know the consequence?
I would argue you do not need to go there from an Islamic perspective. Yeah.
You agree with that? Let us see what's your point. Yeah.
I mean, even if I was Islamic perspective, I'm not satisfied with that because that's just saying, you know, ignorance is bliss. Well, if it doesn't hurt us, it's not gonna know. It's just might as well just stay ignorant about it, you know? I mean, you could accomplish like, I mean, I could give an answer for why this would be Islamically like ethical is that perhaps enhancing our perception can increase ways in which we know Allah. Why did Allah give us 99 names? If we were only to know Allah through one way, He would only give us one name. But we know Him through many different ways. And so we are encouraged to think, reflect. These are eyes on the ground that we know. So I would say that Islamically, it's ethically allowed to explore getting rid of our blind spot.
In a situation when you do something to your eyes, you start seeing beyond things, right? Things that we call the third eye. And the third eye. So, and it might lead to damage, it might lead to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You agree with that? We should go with that.
Well, that's the test of the human, right? It's like Allah will show you something and you will decide if this is a sign of Allah or is this you playing God? You know, we're not saying that, oh, now we can no longer have a blind spot. Therefore, all animals now with Allah have to obey us and other humans have to obey me because I don't have a blind spot now with Allah, right? No, we're not saying that.
Okay, final. What else you got questions? Okay, inshallah, we give let me yes.
So you have like special cases where we know people, you know, through their eye, they perceive things that the majority of people don't. Like for people, for example, who see extra colors, what they call clairvoyance.
Oh, yeah, well, I don't know.
Or like, you
There's
know,
musicians that say that they can see, it's a phenomenon, they can see colors when they hear sounds.
yeah, and this is all through the eye. So like, if there's a procedure that an average person can get done on their eye so that they can see like that special person who has that special vision that God gave them, it's not something that's like an enhancement, you know, that's something that's normal for them. Like, you know what I mean? Like, why not?
Okay,
So,
good.
that's the
Inshallah, this question will track to many other questions. I will reserve that, inshallah, maybe in the summary part. Okay, you have anything you want to add?
Well, it's gonna be responsible.
Okay, so responsible. So they have the final say.
So first responding to the question of like, should we or should we not do this? My perspective would not be one of maslaha or mafsada. Whether or not the end result is maslaha or mafsada, I still think the answer would be no, because back to the ayah of that they would change the creation of Allah. You're changing the creation of Allah if you are enhancing your vision beyond what's normal and beyond what Allah has like permitted and decreed the way that you would perceive the world. It's the same argument for why things like tattoos are haram or whatever, like any basically bodily modification that is beauty enhancement or beyond what Allah has given you, up to the degree that it's normal. It's like why braces aren't haram. And then so that would be my response to the maslaha versus mafsada thing. And then in terms of like what you could get this surgery or whatever that would allow you to have the same vision as another person. It's the same reasoning for why like you could get a surgery that could allow you to be 6'3", but you're not born 6'3", and that's just because Allah bestowed upon that person that particular blessing or that particular like way of perceiving the world, and He didn't do that to you doesn't mean that you're now entitled to it, because Allah didn't decree that for you. He decreed that your vision would be your vision, up to the point that it's not pathologic. I think, and I'm not a mufti, I don't know Allah. This is literally a fiqh question. Like we were talking about how like none of us have the knowledge to answer this. So
yeah,
but from what I understand, on a very like rudimentary level, is that up to a pathologic point, you should not alter your body.
Alhamdulillah, so good. Alhamdulillah, can see some dimensions here. And to what extent, right? To what extent? So you want where you want to stop, because different people have different perceptions. Okay, I'm not going to add up more things here. Okay, Alhamdulillah, let's go. We'll keep it inshallah later for the summary part. Okay, now let us go to the second question. Okay, just want to contextualize our discussion. So this discussion is about design error. Now we go to another part of discussion, which is the second case is about dimension, right?
Yeah.
So second structures are pertaining to things that we could not make certain substance, right? Because we do not have the genes of it, right? So it happens to vitamin C, it happens to many of the essentials amino acids and other things. So we want to see the perspective coming from the science group first. Yes. Sure.
So, I guess for context, so humans have a gene that could hypothetically synthesize vitamin C endogenously, but there are a few mutations that basically prevent them from doing so. And this same mutation is present in chimpanzees, like other primates. So from a scientific perspective, in terms of whether or not this is considered a flaw, there's a couple of theories that have been proposed. One of them is that if humans were synthesizing vitamin C, like sort of the last step to do it would produce hydrogen peroxide and could cause like more free radicals. So there would be sort of that component to it. Another theory is, like if we need vitamin C, why wasn't there like selection or, selection for a species that could produce vitamin C, for instance. And the other possible explanation is that like vitamin C as like a molecule is able to regulate other genes within the genome. So like if vitamin C, which is like one proposed theory, activates another transcription factor that is overseeing a set of genes that kind of alerts the body in a stress environment. So vitamin C, if we're just producing it on our own, it would kind of confuse the body and like kind of the thermostat that's telling us if we're nutritionally deprived. So in that sense, we're kind of saying, well, no, it's not a flaw. There's a purpose potentially. Yes, there are trade-offs, but because the environment has vitamin C and like ways that we can acquire it, it wasn't really like a deficiency in and of itself. And the lack of vitamin C actually like signals to our genes like a whole process that is actually can be thought of as beneficial for us genetically. And then I guess in terms of like whether or not we would consider like a strategy for gene editing for this. So like say in theory, we're able to like kind of reactivate these genes so that we could all produce vitamin C on our own. As a preventative strategy, we were kind of like, well, even from a scientific perspective, we wouldn't support it because when we're looking at like, why do people have vitamin C now? Like they're all highly preventable causes that are like more so systemically caused. So would it make sense as like a medical practitioner to one by one edit someone's genes to like give them vitamin C? Like it's highly illogical, and having the alternative of supplementation that's like affordable. So that was kind of like the big picture reason why. And then when like thinking of like, okay, causes of vitamin C, like it's modifiable risk factors, it's like food access, food systems, or like war, famine, things like that. So like it would make more sense to prevent from that level rather than like trying to change someone's genetic code. So that was kind of our thoughts.
Mashallah. So you can see that the idea is that it's part of the balance and there's a specific purpose of it, not simply because you cannot synthesize it, because it's a part of the whole picture, right? Now, let us allow the science, the Muslim scholars, right? Islamic scholars to ask them any questions on the scientific part. Yes.
Oh, question?
Yes, so ask the question first.
Oh, well, I thought they would disagree with us a lot more.
Okay.
Okay.
Any questions to ask on that, on the mechanism, etc. Is it because of evolution?
Supplements.
Yeah.
So, okay, so you're saying that supplements are cheaper, but what about all the other unintended consequences that come with supplements? And also, what about the pharma companies that sell those supplements and make a ton of money off of that?
Okay. Yes, it's a bit. Yeah.
So actually what causes vitamin C is not because you're not taking a supplement, it's because you're very malnourished. So you're not eating fruits and vegetables, you have a tea and toast diet. So the idea is evolutionarily, we have evolved to a species, the humans and species that have remained on the earth are ones that have been able to have their basic needs met. And under this understanding of basic needs is like you're eating your basic, all your food groups and you're having all those foods. So theoretically, you have access to those things. That's why we are here. And it is because of activities that you evolutionarily are not meant to be happening, aka sailors who spend weeks and weeks and weeks in the ocean. That's actually where scurvy was first discovered in pirates. Is the reason why scurvy exists. So it's not, so the solution is in supplements is actually just fruits and vegetables.
No, I was sorry, the question was supposed to be about genetic modification and.
Okay. I didn't, okay, now, my question is to this group, before I open to the other groups. So we observe that we are not able to synthesize it. I think primates or maybe other animals, they are, right? They're able to do it. So is it because of evolution?
I mean, like the scientific answer is like they don't know. I don't know.
So which means you are saying that not necessarily because of evolution.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned about the word evolution just now. So what do you mean?
What I mean is, if you were to believe, like, you know, the reasons we have these abilities, the eyes in front of our face, and we're walking on 2 legs instead of 4, is because that we've evolved, right? It's, you have these assumptions of what it means to be, like, you know, if I were to live at the bottom of the ocean, right, like I would die, right? Like my being is only good within this context of being on land, right? Being within the context of which humans are made to breathe, the access to oxygen, drinking water, et cetera, et cetera. So if that's why there's a trade-off of like, okay, well, we don't need to we don't need to put in more resources to make vitamin C because we already have access to fruits and vegetables growing on trees. We found ways to make, you know, foods and grow things that have vitamin C, so we don't need to expel energy in our bodies to do that.
So okay, just to give some scenario. Let's say you are being transported to certain areas when you are not accessible to vitamin C supplements or fruits and etc. And you decided to change your genetics. So you agree with that? So that your body can produce it.
The context, but we haven't discussed this too, right? Like we said that right now in the world, the reason people have scurvy is because of a resource redistribution, like a resource restriction in the context of genocide, conflict, colonization, imperialism, right? These are human systemic issues that are avoidable, right? But if we were in the context of, you know, there's no land, right? The big California, North America earthquake has happened, and now there's no way of, you know, growing healthy fruits, which some can probably claim that's already happening now. Then maybe it would be reasonable to explore turning that gene on again to help humans survive.
But what about the things you mentioned earlier that this is part of the balance and everything?
Yeah, so I think one thing to consider is like, even if we were to allow people to synthesize vitamin C on their own, like the issues that she's bringing up in terms of like famine or hunger, or even if it's like things that we see more in this country, like if it's malabsorption or eating disorders or alcoholism, like if you're masking that nutritional deficiency, then like you might be kind of masking the other indicators of like being able to like detect that disease, because a lot of times you'll pick up on something like alcoholism because of nutritional deficiency. So like having these like clinical indicators when you have these like processes or they're having like some sort of GI issue is like helpful to like actually treat the underlying cause.
Okay, inshallah. Before we any other questions from other groups you want to ask on the vitamin C group? Anything? Very straightforward. Nothing. Okay, that's all. Now we listen to the Islamic perspective. So yes, I want to share on the Islamic perspective.
Okay, so the first question was, how can human dependence on dietary vitamin C be understood from an Islamic perspective? And so when making this mind map, the first thing that came to our mind was, you know, when we see pain in our bodies, most of the time it's an indicator that something is wrong, something isn't going right in your body. And so without that potential pain, no matter how bad it may be, can actually be a good thing, because now you know we need to fix something. And so vitamin C, we said, like, comes from fruits, you know. In Islam, fruits are seen as a good thing. And so why not encourage man to eat something that's healthy and good for you? You know, the term fruitful, it means something that's good. So fruits have always been seen as like a blessing in this dunya. So we had some Quranic examples regarding fruits. In Baqarah, there are a few ayahs that talk about how Allah blessed us with fruits. And there's an ayah that says, and we will surely test you with something of fear and hunger and loss of wealth and lives and fruits. And why are fruits specifically being mentioned when Allah talks about being tested? Okay, that's like a direct reference.
So you're saying that, so let's say you're not able to synthesize vitamin C, is a part of test, is it?
I want to say Allah is just encouraging us to do good for our bodies, you know? And so we said that typically when someone is in good health, good condition, they're not really thinking about the times when they're sick. When you're sick, you always look back and you're like, man, I miss those days when I was healthy. Like I could breathe through my nose, my throat didn't hurt. And it's like the second you're healthy, you're not thinking about the time you were in pain. And so being in pain can also, you know, encourage one to turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to repent and realizes, man, like we cannot be arrogant. We need to have humility and know that pain can happen to us.
Yeah, any additional points?
Oh, so part of what else we talked about was thinking about fruits as a sign of Allah's bounty and provision. Again, as Aisha mentioned, like there's so many examples in the Quran about the bounty Allah provides us with on this earth and how essentially like this experience of eating, if you're engaging with it intentionally and mindfully, then it can be an act of ibadah. Because I mean, we have all these du'as, but like before you eat and after you eat, and it's about practicing that gratitude of where the food comes from. So it's not just like a mindless consumption or like while you're just like watching TV and you're just eating, which I have a habit of doing that sometimes, but it's something to be working on, that like, you know, you think about where your food comes from and like, or the people that whose labor went into making it. And so like one benefit of like eating these fruits as opposed to like supplements or genetic modification is it reminds you to be intentional and to appreciate the natural beauty, the natural flavor, like that Allah has put in this fruit, like this life form, really, to give, to like help continue your life.
So the sense of gratitude.
Yeah.
Not to Allah.
Yeah, to like, it's like to awaken your consciousness and remind you, like, this is from Allah. Like, this is not just, you can't just like pop a pill and like you're fine. Like,
Yes, any additional points? You want to mention? What about, okay, the point here is that it's okay if you don't have the ability to synthesize vitamin C. There's nothing wrong in Islam or against nothing against Islam. When you mention that certain structures of our body cannot produce vitamin C. Like it doesn't against any wisdom of Allah, any ahsan taqwim concept. No, right?
I mean, because if you think about like what does that mean, like if like I think in like Western concept of evolution, we think about like what's the underlying like value that we're placing in evolution. It's that the survival of the fittest. So essentially that those who are of the most ideal bodies live the longest, essentially, or are most equipped to survive in this world. But if in Islam, the whole point is that this life is a lesser life and it's a test, then, you know, like Allah deemed it best for us to be sent here instead of staying in Jannah, which is perfect. So evidently Allah thought that there's some kind of wisdom, there's benefit to having us come to a less perfect world in such a way that He will elevate us above the rest of creation if we can go back to Jannah. So like if we're just thinking about like perfect bodies, like I think angels are supposed to have perfect bodies, but you know they're talking about now. So this idea of us something like we have to kind of think about why is our first reaction just like this idea of like having unlimited everything. And I think that just comes from like trying to play God in a sense, when that is not what Allah has decreed is the best.
Okay, Shoaib, any additional points?
We don't prove that genetic modification.
Oh,
yeah.
Right?
Just 2 minutes now. Yeah. What do you think about Islamic perspective on the question?
Because we thought that it caused side effects because when people change the plant genetically modification, it's not good for people's health. We avoid to eat that genetically modification plant. So if people change the genetic modification in human, it causes some side effects. Maybe.
So
Yeah.
it seems that you're changing things.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Then Islamically, like is done as a concept of tabdil, tagayyur, as mentioned by you before, right? So it's not necessarily not good to do that, right?
Yeah, we don't prove that because then you try to remediate something.
Yeah, because like the other group say you can just take it from the fruits.
Yeah.
No need to change the genetics.
Instead of doing modification, genetic modification, you can eat more fruit, vegetables, and change the diet. And
So basically, on the Islamic perspective, the idea that our body cannot synthesize certain things, Islamically, it's not considered as flaw, right? Because you can justify in terms of dependency, you mentioned just now, in terms of gratitude, in terms that you know that as a human, you have certain parts that you are not a complete person when you compare yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So agree with that notion. Okay, clear, done. Okay, because we have like 15 more minutes, I need to wrap up things. Okay, let us go to the, done, right? Your group is okay. Let us go to the final group, which is, okay, now it's about when you're not able to do something or synthesize something. The last case is a bit different. When you have something, but you need to remove it. Right? Now, very interesting case. It's normal case we have in hospitals, and you have like tonsils, for example, and appendix being removed. So you want to see the idea. Now you have certain structures, and you want to remove it because you think there is no function or minor function, or it can cause disease. So you want to know what's the science tells us. Yes.
In the interest of time, do you want me to just skip to the questions?
Yeah, you can just do that. Sure.
Okay. Or to keep it brief, there's a couple of questions, but I would highlight that the appendix does have functions, although minor. For one, it's believed to play a role in mounting an immune response. It also plays a role in re-inoculating the gut after certain GI illnesses. So there is a role, and it also is evolutionary selected for, as many mammals are shown to have increased longevity when they do have an appendix. So there is believed to be function both in terms of the mechanistic perspective as well as the evolutionary perspective. So then to keep things brief, I'll just jump into questions. So with however, so like while there is believed to be some function for the appendix, there are also harms. So we found a review talking about how appendicitis actually causes globally a burden of a couple $2 billion on global healthcare systems, as well as over 10,000 deaths annually. So given that, cost benefit of the appendix, why would humans be created with this structure that has not so much function and a lot of cost if humans were meant to be created of perfect form?
Okay, then you're asking them questions. Oh, mashallah. Oh, you're answering the questions. Okay, then. So the basic idea is that it has functions, right? It has functions. Okay, actually, you're not supposed to ask them. They will ask you first. So you go, beyond the line. Okay, so let them ask you first. Okay. Yes. What do you want to ask for science block?
So do you guys think that the appendix is part of other means of scientific discoveries?
Other means of scientific discoveries?
Yes. So even though now we're saying that appendix is just there, just to be there, but do you guys think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us appendix as part of other scientific discoveries? It's part of a different mission and not just the bodily the purpose of it is for us to discover other discoveries because of its presence. Does it make sense?
So basically like a supportive to other systems?
Yes, how it could support other findings, even though it
itself, it does not have a purpose or a function, right? That's what we know, but it can play a role into other discoveries like
Okay, rather
ultrasound,
than become
CT,
complex and say
everything
that this is
else.
evolution. Rather than say that this is evolution, why don't we go for other discoveries, right?
Through this, yes. Through appendix.
So what do you think?
Well, one thing is, I do think that like what we found is there is like a minor role to the appendix. It's not that there's no role, that it does seem to have a function. It's just not like a significant function as compared to some other organs that we have. So that's one distinction I wanted to make. And then in terms of the appendix and what it might be in connection to other functions that we don't yet know in the body, one thing that we found in our research is that there appears to be some sort of link between the appendix and colitis specifically. So, I mean, that is a field that does warrant further discovery, but I do agree that I think by having the structure there, that it can inform like future scientific discoveries and better understandings of how the human body works. We're just not at the place right now that we understand all those connections.
Okay, good. Any questions from the phone? Other groups you want to ask this group? So I'm giving another context. Let's say, we have been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have a fetus. And then Allah asks you to circumcise. Right? So, yeah, maybe we throw this question, maybe you're going to explain the Islamic, this is the Islamic perspective, right? Let us see what you're going to ask. I'm not asking you this question, just to give you an idea, given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but asked to be removed.
To my understanding, I think it's all part of embryological tissues. And when we talk about embryology and how beautifully, like, we have one rod, and then like through that, like we have midgut and foregut. So I think it's all part of one system. And it's like in one house, you have kids, you have mom, you have dad. And if we look at it in a way where kids are playing their role, mom is playing their role, and dad's playing their role. But when we separate all of those things, I think the function of it is kind of less significant, whereas when it's like a one house, it's more happiness. So it's like they're part of one system, and one thing, like everything completes one other thing. Does that make sense?
But the idea is that when you remove it, is it because of science or because of religion?
I think we remove it for both science and religion.
Okay, fine. Then we can explain first because I have other questions in Islamic perspective. Yeah. Anything you want to share on the Islamic perspective?
I'm not 100%. I mean, because that's scientifically it has advantages. Like
No, I mean Islamic perspective.
from Islamic perspective, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Prophet said it, then
Yes, I mean, okay, I understand that. I mean, for the appendix case.
Oh, for the
Yeah,
appendix
yeah,
case.
just for question, sorry for that. Okay. Yeah.
A lot of the ideas has been shared. I think it also shared the same kind of notions. The ayah that talks about ahsani taqweem definitely say that Allah created something with purpose, and to think that there are wisdoms that maybe we don't know yet, just because the scientific discovery has not been discovered yet at this point. And as they talk about, like, apparently there are functions too, but with more research, I would say then there would be more like benefits as compared to the harm.
So it's only become non-benefit when you have the disease.
Yes.
Then you become inflamed.
Mhm.
Right? So
Yeah.
if you're not inflamed, then should you remove it?
Yeah, so I think one of the ayah that we also put here is in Surah Al-Baqarah that says, إن الله لا يستحي أن يضرب مثلا ما بعوضة فما فوقها, that Allah make like the parables of the mosquitoes, and then I think it is a beautiful verse that talks about even a smallest mosquito that would have some purpose. So that's also relates to like some wisdoms about like, oh, maybe this is also a way that Allah wants us to maintain our health, like what the sister here mentioned in their group, like this is a way that Allah wants us to protect us. And like in some hadith that an item of eating, or like how we choose our food that is not just halal but also tayyib. So then we are actually eating something that is high in fiber, low in like junk food that actually increases your disposition to having an inflamed appendix. So yeah, that's one of most like the idea here that it has a purpose, and maybe it's just like our wisdom and knowledge does not reach that point yet.
Mashallah, very good. So I think it answers your question, or you want to propose the clarification? It's okay, alhamdulillah. Okay, anything you want to add?
There's one more question about gene editing, and then I think this is also similar to the brother that shares with Aya in Surat An-Nisa that changing over creation, maybe it's just like the wasas of shaitan. So I think in Islamic point of view, it's not permissible to gene edit yourself just to have like prevent you from having appendicitis. And scientifically speaking as well, there's also paper that says if you remove your appendix, you increase your chances of having colon cancer. So maybe it has a purpose, but we don't really know it yet. So I don't think it's permissible. I mean, we think like our consensus is not permissible.
In similar line of this, you can talk about wisdom teeth, right? It's been impacted. So once it becomes impacted, you need to remove it. So they say that because it's impacted, then you should remove it. Right? It's useless. Why? Because we used to have a big jaws. Now we become less size in jaws. So the teeth cannot fit enough, so it becomes impacted. You see how they come up with the ideas, with the explanation. Okay. Before I make a conclusion, few minutes. Any questions? Anything you want to ask for this group? No, right? Okay. Let us discuss a little bit more. Okay. First thing first, about the concept of Ahsani Taqwim. Now, is there any difference between the best creation and the most complete creation? Akmal Taqwim or Ahsani Taqwim? Is there any difference? For example, if I say this person is the best creation, does it mean that this person has the most strength, the most powerful body, the most powerful eyes? Do we think in that way? No, right? Because Quran mentioned, for example, in Surah Al-Ghashiyah, chapter number 88, أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. Quran even asks us, tell us that to see among the animals, some of them possess better than us. For example, the cats has better night vision than us. Right? If you are thinking you're so strong, you can fight MMA with the elephants. The African elephants, you know, like if you think you are so strong, right? If your strength is the stronger you are, the best you are, then you should fight with elephants. But if you think that you can run better than the animals, then you should have the competition with the cheetah. Cheetah can run how many miles per hour? 60, 70, you know, if it's like a motorbike, the cheetah will be at the back of you. Right? So the thing is, not in terms of having the best structures. But when we read tafsir, we can find certain scholars mention about it. For example, Ibn Kathir and some of the scholars mention about, because we are upright position, we are better compared to the certain animals who are quadrupedal. This is the scholar's opinion, because they were seeing that way. Prof. Omar mentioned about Ahsani Taqwim in terms of symmetrical features. But I would say that Ahsani Taqwim means that you have the faculty of reasoning, the faculty of intellect, the faculty of spiritual. But then comes to the question with the animals and plants that row and etc. That's another separate things to discuss. But Ahsani Taqwim is more than that. Does not mean that we are the best superior in terms of structures, because we were asked to look upon the animals, right? So that's not that mean, because if you're putting in that way, then you have problems to justify this. We start saying that we are naturally cannot produce vitamin C, so we are naturally that have certain structures need to be removed. That's point number one. Point number two is that I did mention about circumcision and etc. Why don't we see that in the perspective of religious, which is fine to do that. Part of obedience. Part of obedience. That's why we see earlier when Prof. Omar mentioned about the 3 dimensions, the empirical, about the revelatory, as well as the rational, right? So the reality is not only lies on empirical. So we do that because of ibadah. That is fine. When Allah gives us something, and Allah asks us to remove something, we do it for ibadah. yes, we can justify in terms of science. Because in science, at the early embryological development, you need that. But when a certain age, you can remove that. You can expose the gland penis. It's fine. So it means that you can justify in terms of science, right? Okay, the second point. The third thing is that about functions. It can be major functions, it can be minor functions. Both are functions, right? For example, you have 2 hands and 2 legs, right? Anyone having 1 leg? Although it's okay, we still consider 2 legs, okay? So the thing, because you're folding your legs, okay? So, so imagine now if someone got an accident, right? Someone got an accident, he can remove his limbs, he still can survive with 1 legs, he still can survive 1 hands. So you can say that, okay, for you, just 1 hand is good enough. Can we say that? You're not going to say that. He might have some certain disabilities, right? So just because certain structures have been removed doesn't mean that you are not a complete person. Because it might part of the balance. And the fourth thing is that when we use our logical thinking, which one drives more research? Rather than to put all of this at evolution, no need to study more, or actually you try to find the reason behind it. Why? For example, wisdom teeth, right? Why? Is it because of the environment? Yes, studies been done on the nutrition part. It's a study in China who discussed it. A lot of people in that region need to remove their wisdom teeth because of the diet in that region. Right? Okay. I need to become very fast. I'm really sorry because of time. Point number 5 is about evolution. Do you really agree that all of these things, you put it on the evolution point of view? Animals have this, they don't have this, our ancestors have this, so we should have this. Are you really buy that story, or we need to really see it and studies about it? This comes to the issue of common ancestry, which Prof. Omar mentioned, and even Prof. Shoaib mentioned about it. Right? Just because we have similar structures or similar functions with certain animals does not mean we have the common ancestry. There's another concept, we call it homoplasy, which we have similar functions, but we have different structures. For example, ants. Ants, they have the warfare behavior, right? And we also have a warfare behavior. So what, we and ants are not brothers, right? Tomorrow we're going to discuss, inshallah, in my topic, we talk about genetics. I will share some information that even with bananas, we have a lot of similarities. So you and banana are brothers. Even rats, we mentioned about 98% chimpanzees, right? We also have, so we're going to discuss that tomorrow, inshallah. So that's the 4th point. And the 5th point is that I think Sister mentioned about the concept that we are weak and etc. We depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So imagine if you are a superhuman, like better than Avengers, better than Thanos, I'm not sure, I didn't watch all, right? So what happens to you? Try to reflect back about the story of Iblis. What happens when he believes that he is the most superior entity? You become takabur. That is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us with optimum functions. Yes, we might suffer from disease, yes, congenital defects and etc. Genetic disease, yes, we agree with that. But we are functioning. Similar in the case of inverted retina, the eagles have the same arrangement like us. The eagles are surviving better. They never argue with us. Oh, I have inverted like you. So it's not, sometimes we are buying these ideas and we put it directly to evolution and we stop research. So as a Muslim researcher later, you start to think, oh, okay, why it happens in this way? Right? Why certain point? Is it like, okay, you did mention about vitamin C, I need to mention about this thing. But I think it's a guru jinn, right? There's one name of the jinn. Galo, Gulo, I'm not sure. Right? So at the moment, they only find one function of that particular genes. So if research can be done, maybe have other functions. Because another concept, we call it acceptation. Acceptation means what? Initially, we have certain function of certain structures, but now it changed to different function. I give a simple example. Penguin, right? Our mind conception thinks that when you have wings, you should fly. Right? We always think in that way. But do penguins fly? It becomes disastrous, right? You see penguins start flying, right? But penguins use wings for underwater. Underwater navigating, become very fast. The wings make them swim very fast to avoid being eaten by the what is it? Is it whales? Right? So the thing is, why our conception, wings definitely must be fly. What about ostrich? They use wings to fly? I never see ostrich fly. It becomes scary. You see the fly. So the thing is, sometimes even we have the auricle muscle, you read about anatomy, you see that it's vestigial. But why? Why you think? Because auricles, you can wiggle your ears. Some of you can do that. We can do that, right? The animal used it for sound echo, detecting sound. The cats, you call the cat, the ears start moving in, right? For us, we cannot do that. It become very scary. You call doctor, you saw I'm starting like this, It become very scary. We need to move our head. But for ours, function, auricles are for different functions. So we know that certain structures change. Okay, and the sixth point, just to mention, in evolution view, when the structures not function, not being used, we're not going to keep it. If we undergo atrophy and etc. Because there's no function, why you want to keep the structure for the subsequent generations? No need. Right? So yeah, this is the way of looking things and looking structures beyond the way we are being taught, simply by saying that this is vestigial organs. And just to close this, the concept of vestigial organs, when you believe that certain structures have no function or less function, it's always been revised. Few hundred years back, do you know that thyroid gland was considered as vestigial? Imagine, the master gland of the body was thought to be vestigial, but because of science and technology, imaging and etc., now we know it's a master gland. So we might discover more things in future, right? Okay, and so many finals. Certain structure might change. For example, we have the muscle palmaris longus. Some of us may not have it, right? So you can't simply say, oh, this is error. This is design flaw. No, it depends on a certain person. It helps in flexor, although it's a weak flexor. But the thing is, certain structure might change. That is, for example, in Everest or in certain people living nearby the sea, when they are able to dive without using oxygen or go up, they have a bigger lungs. So you call them what? You still call them humans, right? Humans with big lungs. But usually we call it, for us, if you give a lot of donation, humans with big hearts. But at the end of the day, we can't simply say they are evolving to another creature or another species. Okay. So that's the final outcome. To understand that the Asani Taqweem, there's a nuance on the concept, right? And as a Muslim doctor, we should know that we should differentiate something that undergoes certain disease that can be treated, or congenital disease, or something naturally being created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but not considered as disease. Right? Not considered as disease. It has certain functions. Either we know it or we do not know it. That's the issue of wisdom. Because the idea of claiming that this is wrong, no function, etc., you are as if you are undermining Allah's wisdom, which is problematic, because Quran mentioned very clear. For example, in Surah Ali Imran, chapter number 3, verse number 191, Ma khalaqta hadha batila, subhanaka faqina adhaban nar. In Surah As-Sad mentioned, it's a perception by the non-believers who believe that Allah created something in vain. Allah creates something must have a purpose, as we mentioned. Either we know it or we do not know it. Right? See, I'm not going for the theological tangent, it's a lot. But that's the take-home message. Okay, alhamdulillah, more than 5 minutes. Any questions or anything you want to comment, final? You must comment or you cannot sleep tonight. Yeah, anyone? No, right? So I hope the session, yes. Yeah.
Dr. Sabi has a short announcement to make after this.
Oh, okay, I'm going to give, inshallah. So I hope this session benefit all of us. You enjoyed the discussion. Thank you very much for your participation. See me tomorrow, inshallah, for the discussion of genetics and faith and few stuff on it, inshallah. Yeah. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Afternoon. Hi, nice to see you. Thank you all for being here. I'm not a doctor. I'm actually an MSTP in graduate school. So I've contacted many of you and spoken to some of you as part of the recruitment for this phase. So I'm glad that everyone's finally here, and inshallah it's been beneficial. One of the main aims of this weekend was really to contribute to filling the gap between the traditional Islamic approach to science and medicine and what is conventionally taught in the MD allopathic track. And although this program goes really far in the distance in the range of epistemology and worldview and ontology and all the ologies. There is also a professionalism gap where the ideal doctor in the West is often historically a Nazi. However, we have better role models, alhamdulillah, but there is a need to actually develop evidence-based approaches to formulating, ideal models of Muslim doctoring and then cultivating people through those pathways. And so the study information that was sent out over the weekend is some work that Dr. Padella and I are doing to gather information from students who are in this pathway to really build something for you guys. So a couple of you were kind enough to reach out and indicate that you were interested in the study, but you may have had to travel, or you were interested but not available on Sunday. Even if you're not available this Sunday, if you could please see me and share your contact information so Dr. Padella and I can at least set up like a virtual focused interview with you guys. It's a qualitative methodology where you basically go through a pre-prepared script and then you analyze it later for themes and develop, inshallah, in this case, curriculum based on that. So again, even if you're not free Sunday and you got to take off, tomorrow's Monday. Oh my God, sorry. I'm coming in from out of town, so a little delusional. Best, please, if you are able and interested and willing to contribute and being part of building this, let me know, inshallah, and I won't take more of your time beyond that. Jazakallah. Assalamu
All right, that's the end of today's classes. I hope everyone enjoyed all the lectures. I certainly did from my little corner, Elizabeth. I was forcing myself not to participate sometimes. I'm like, I am not one of the students. So tomorrow, I think we start at 8:30, right? So okay, yeah, so be here by 8:30 actually. Yeah. Aim to be here by 8:30, inshallah, for our last day together. So sad. All right, Jazakallah khair. You are dismissed. You can leave the tables as is. We're gonna need them like this for tomorrow. And have a great rest of your day. I think I'm gonna get some ice cream.
Just one very quick announcement. So if anyone is interested in buying any of the books, you can just let me know, and you can get the copy now and you can pay tomorrow in the free.
Did you hear? If you're interested in getting one of the books, you can pay her tomorrow, and you can take the book today, and
I'll just kind of like.
yeah, and she'll write down your name, and you can pay her tomorrow. Okay.
Tomorrow. I know. Yeah. Like but I
Okay, that's
right. Like oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, oh no. It's just like, oh, you said like the same.
Orang karena saya suka, tapi even if nanti ada teknologi yang memberikan transaksi kita, sebenarnya itu tidak menghilangkan syariat atau itu sama.
It was just like a, oh, now I feel mean because sort of like.
Orang HIV gitu nggak jadi legal gitu karena ada vaksinnya.
It doesn't know what the
Boleh nggak jadi tapi katanya harus bikin membuat HIV dan tapi kan ternyata enggak kan.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Everything I said.
No, that's not like you see.
I know, but better than not, like they didn't know.
But I'm saying, somebody said no.
But you also. Yeah, because I went out of state.
Right.
Pretty. But just like. I did it here. So it's like just be free. But I'm it's like beer or something for me.
Yeah.
That's like always.
Yeah.
But it sounds like if I choose to go to one, that's because of Prime But then like, it's not, but then illiterate. Yeah, you just gotta. And then you said it's really like the other way around. Or can you explain why?
Been here for a couple of years.